Chapter 38-27. 3 Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Pills for 1,500 Spiritual Jades. What do you think, young hero Lin? Hong Zhong raised his head and asked. 500 Spiritual Jades for 1 Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Pill. Although this purchase price was not very high, it was definitely not low. Although the Hong Chamber of Commerce could make a lot of money from it, Hong Zhong had already taken good care of Lin Yi. Lin Yi had no objection to this at all. He immediately nodded and said, "Okay, thank you, shopkeeper Hong. However, I still have a presumptuous request. Young hero Lin, just tell me what you need. I will do my best." Hong Zhong was a little surprised. He had dealt with this Lin second twice, but he had never heard him make any requests. However, out of the importance he attached to Lin Yi, and the fact that Lin Yi had indeed brought him a lot of benefits both times, Hong Zhong would try his best to satisfy Lin Yi's requests as long as they were not too excessive. However, Lin Yi's next request stunned Hong Zhong. "I want to stay here for a while. This won't hinder shopkeeper Hong from doing business, right?" Of course. Young hero Lin, please do as you wish. Even if you want to stay here, I can let someone arrange it. Hong Zhong chuckled. He thought that Lin second really accepted Yu's suggestion and planned to stay here. It was no wonder. In his opinion, Lin Yi was afraid of Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhe. He wanted to hide here for a while to wear down their patience and make them give up. Facing an enemy like Nan Tianyong, who was completely impossible to deal with, it was human nature to be afraid and want to retreat. However, in Hong Zhong's opinion, Lin Yi's idea was still a little too wishful thinking. With the conflict between him and Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhe, the other party would never let him go so easily. It was useless to delay here for a long time. The other party would still wait here, and it was impossible for them to leave. Maybe after a while, this Lin second would regret it and take the initiative to ask his Hong Chamber of Commerce's guest experts to protect him. However, Lin Yi smiled and shook his head. "Stay here? That's not necessary. I only need to wait here for 2 hours. 2 hours? Hong Zhong couldn't help but be stunned. Even a veteran like him couldn't figure out what Lin Yi was planning. He could only laugh and nod at Lin Yi. "Then, young hero Lin, please go ahead. If you need anything, feel free to ask me at any time." In the blink of an eye, 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Nan Tianyong and Yu just stood guard at the street opposite the Hong Chamber of Commerce for an entire 2 hours under the scorching sun. "Disciple, do you think that brat will hide in the Hong Merchant Guild and not dare to come out? It's a waste of time to waste with him." Nan Tianyong frowned impatiently. Yu Zhe was the one who would fight to the death with Lin Yi, not him, Nan Tianyong. He appeared here not only to vent his disciple's anger, but also to vent his own anger. He had no way of getting back at the Hong Chamber of Commerce last time. If he wanted to vent his anger, he could only vent it on Lin Yi. However, if he were to continue wasting his time here just to vent his anger, then he would not be able to do so. He, Nan Tianyong, did not have such patience. In his opinion, due to the difference in strength between them, if he were in Lin Yi's position, he would definitely not step out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, even if he was beaten to death, as long as he hid in the Hong Chamber of Commerce. And if he took a step out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he would immediately be targeted by a peak late-stage foundation establishment expert. He was about to become a dead man. It was clear at a glance what he should do. "No, I could feel it when we fought last time. This brat doesn't look like a coward. He will definitely come out." Yu Zhe shook his head. After experiencing the life and death struggle last time, even if he did not know Lin Yi's true identity, his understanding of Lin Yi was probably far above most people in the Welcome Pavilion. If Lin Yi was really such a coward, then how could he have defeated a mid-stage foundation establishment expert like him last time? Challenging someone of a higher level not only required strength, but also courage and confidence. Neither was lacking. "Tisk, it's already been 2 hours. If this goes on, who knows how long we'll have to wait. Forget it, disciple. Continue watching here. Master, I'll go up and have a cup of tea. Nan Tianyong rolled his eyes at Yuzha and turned to enter the shop behind him. There was a private room upstairs for him to rest in. However, just as Nan Tianyong turned around, Yuzha was suddenly shocked. His eyes that were staring at the Hong Chamber of Commerce suddenly widened. Master, he came out. What? He knows that I'm guarding here, and this brat still dares to come out? Nan Tianyong was shocked and turned around in disbelief. Following the direction of Yu's finger, a figure carrying a cloth bag was slowly walking out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. This figure was indeed the guy he saw at the window on the second floor. The culprit who almost killed Yuzha and made Nan Tianyong suffer at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Er. This guy, I really don't know if I should say that he has guts or that he's looking for death. Looking at Lin Yi's figure, Yuzha's veins couldn't help but bulge, and his expression was ferocious. Although he believed that this Lin Er wouldn't be so cowardly as to hide in the Hong Chamber of Commerce and not come out, he never thought that in just a short 2 hours, this guy would actually dare to appear. Moreover, he was alone and didn't find any help from the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Of course, he's looking for death. With me, your master, here, this brat is merely at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. Do you think he can go back alive? Nan Tianyong laughed loudly. With his strength as an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, to be able to make him personally take action. For any expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm, it would be an honor. Of course, behind the honor was death. Other than that, there was no other possibility. Hee with Master here. That brat is definitely dead this time. However, that brat is extremely sinister and cunning. So, Master, you must not give him any chance to breathe and talk. Once you see him, kill him in one move and avenge your disciple. Yuzha narrowed his eyes with hatred as he egged Nan Tianyong on. The reason why he deliberately said this was because he was afraid that his master would ask something he shouldn't ask about Lin Er, such as the star inkstone. He had called Nan Tianyong over only to kill this Lin Er and avenge him. In order to ensure that the same mistake from last time would not repeat, he had brought a super fighter. Chapter 38:28. Don't worry, in front of me, your master. That kid has no right to speak, let alone a chance to speak. Nan Tianyong didn't know what was going on and responded cheerfully. Anyway, he really didn't have any interest in talking nonsense with this kind of ant. He just wanted to kill someone to vent his anger. That's for the best. Yuzha inwardly rejoiced. After Nan Tianyong dealt with Lin Er, he would find a chance to steal the star inkstone from him. If he could find a few top-grade Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills, that would be for the best. At this time, a slightly familiar voice suddenly sounded in front of the two of them. Is that so? That's a pity. I originally wanted to exchange a few moves with Senior, but it seems like I won't have this chance. Nan Tianyong and Yuzha were suddenly shocked, because along with this voice, a familiar face appeared in front of them. It was the kid that made the two of them grind their teeth, Lin Er. In Yuzha's expectations, even if this guy had the guts to come out of the Hong conglomerate, he would definitely run away. He wouldn't dare to stay in this kind of place, let alone appear in front of the two of them. However, at this moment, Lin Yi openly stood in front of them. The distance between them was less than 10 feet. Looking at Lin Yi's expression that seemed like a smile that wasn't a smile, Nan Tianyong and Yuzha were shocked and unconsciously took a step back. Then they reacted. They were at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment stage, and one in the middle stage of the Foundation establishment stage. They actually retreated in front of a peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment stage. What a shameful action! After coming out of the Hong conglomerate, not only did they not seize the time to run away, but they actually took the initiative to come up. This kind of action was practically courting death. In an instant, Yu Zhe, this scheming person, was actually the same as his arrogant master, Nan Tianyong, by Lin Yi's incomparably provocative action. Provoked to the point of anger, "TSK, since you voluntarily delivered yourself to me, then I'll teach you a move. Are you ready to die?" Nan Tianyong laughed coldly. His aura suddenly rose to the extreme. Then he was about to attack Lin Yi, who was very close at hand. This guy was indeed much stronger than expected. Although he already knew, after personally experiencing Nan Tianyong's aura, Lin Yi was even more certain of this. With his strength at the peak of the early foundation establishment stage, even if he didn't have an advantage in terms of cultivation level, at least he wouldn't be at an absolute disadvantage when facing other opponents in the past. But now, facing Nan Tianyong, an expert at the peak of the late stage of the foundation establishment realm. Even if Lin Yi had all sorts of powerful trump cards, he was still unable to make up for such a great disparity in cultivation level. If they were to really fight, Nan Tianyong did not even need to use any martial skills. A casual palm strike would be enough to obliterate Lin Yi. This was an unavoidable, cruel reality. However, in the face of Nan Tianyong's unreserved, killing intent, Lin Yi didn't have the slightest expression of fear. Instead, he grinned and said, "Haha, Senior Nan, are you sure you want to fight in this place?" "Huh, what kind of bullshit was that? Do I need to choose a good feng shui location to kill you?" Nan Tianyong's face was full of ridicule and contempt. Yu Zhe, who was beside him, also looked at him like he was an idiot. "Are you saying this because you're scared and trying to stall for time? Or are you trying to beg for mercy? Unfortunately, no matter what your goal is, it's all just wishful thinking. My master isn't stupid enough to believe the nonsense of an enemy like you." The purpose of these words was naturally to make Nan Tianyong act as soon as possible. She didn't want any verbal communication between Lin Yi and Nan Tianyong. This was because the slightest slip of the tongue could cause the secret of the star inkstone to be exposed. He absolutely couldn't allow this kind of thing to happen. Even the slightest possibility had to be nipped in the bud. Since Yu Zhe had said this, Nan Tianyong naturally wouldn't waste any more time. He immediately nodded and laughed coldly. "I've said it before. If you want to talk to me, a lowly ant like you is far from qualified. Go die." Finished speaking, Nan Tianyong's palm quickly condensed true energy. In an instant, his killing intent soared to the sky. However, Lin Yi didn't seem to care about Nan Tianyong's action that could kill him at all. After a slight smile, he carried the bag of spiritual medicine that he bought from the Hong Merchant Association and turned to leave as if nothing had happened. What kind of bullshit was this brought up to? He purposely ran in front of the two of them. Could it be that he wanted to use his life to taunt and provoke them? There must be a hole in this brat's brain. Chapter 38-29. Only now did Nan Tianyong react with a head full of cold sweat. Indeed, if he killed this Lin heir of unknown origin here, there wouldn't be any trouble with the 3 great pavilions. But before that, he still had to get the approval of the large merchants in the inner street. Although killing was common, if someone died in the middle of the street, it would affect their business. Merchants prioritized profit, so no matter what the 3 great pavilions' law enforcement hall did, in this inner street, they had to manage and they had the final say. Like a bucket of cold water poured over his head, facing more than a dozen powerful experts, even Nan Tianyong's heart couldn't help but tremble, not to mention Yu Zhe, who was only at the middle stage of foundation establishment realm. At this moment, he was enveloped by so many powerful auras, giving him the feeling that he would become a corpse in the next moment, never to walk out of the inner street alive. "Disciple, looks like you were right. This kid is indeed cunning." Nan Tianyong finally reacted. Why did Lin Yi dare to be so brazen in front of him and his disciple? Not only did he not escape, but he even took the initiative to come forward. So it was because he had nothing to fear. In such a situation, even if Nan Tianyong gritted his teeth. He didn't dare to act rashly against Lin Yi. Otherwise, even if he successfully killed Lin Yi, he would probably have to pay a heavy price. To deal with a mere peak early-stage Foundation establishment realm ant, this was clearly not worth it. Master, let him be arrogant for a while, it's no big deal. When he walks out of the inner street, Master, you can slap him to death, he will still die. Yu Zhi consoled. He knew that his cheap master had a fiery temper. If he attacked in anger, it would be bad if he was implicated. Although Nan Tianyong was a slow-witted person, no matter what, he had suffered a huge loss at the Hong Chamber of Commerce previously. If he didn't learn his lesson, then he wouldn't be where he was today. As expected, they caught up. Lin Yi glanced at the two people not far behind him, the corners of his mouth curling up into a playful smile. The reason why he took the initiative to come forward was indeed, as Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhi thought, it was because there were so many guest experts of the Shang clan around. Under Hong Zhong's intentional guidance, Lin Yi was indeed fearless here. However, Lin Yi was not so bored as to provoke them just for the sake of provoking them. He deliberately provoked the master and disciple at such a close distance, especially Nan Tianyong, with a special intention. He and Yu Zhi had always been mortal enemies, and this Yu Zhi was extremely scheming. It was unrealistic to try to confuse or set a trap for Yu Zhi. However, what Lin Yi wanted to do now was not to make a fuss about Yu Zhi. His target was Nan Tianyong. Although Yu Zhi was an expert in the middle stage of the Foundation establishment realm and posed a significant threat to Lin Yi, he couldn't be compared to Nan Tianyong, who was an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. For Lin Yi, if he couldn't get rid of Nan Tianyong, who was at the peak of the late stage of Foundation establishment, then even if he could find a chance to kill Yu Zhi, it would be useless. He wouldn't be able to get rid of Nan Tianyong. In the end, he would still have to die. Simply running away was definitely not realistic. After all, no matter how fast Lin Yi was, it was only when compared to experts of the same level. Facing a great expert at the peak of the late stage of Foundation establishment realm, it was simply a fool's talk to rely on speed to get rid of the opponent. It was impossible under normal circumstances to jump levels to deal with an enemy like Nan Tianyong, who had such a large disparity in levels. Even if he was lucky enough to get the chance to attack, he would only have one chance at most. There would be no second chance. Therefore, in a situation where there was no chance for Lin Yi to survive, even if it looked like he was courting death in the eyes of others, he had to brace himself and court death. Other people wouldn't die if they didn't court death. However, when it came to Lin Yi, if he didn't court death, he would die instead. Lin Yi's method of courting death was simple and direct, and that was to provoke Nan Tianyong. Unlike the scheming Yu Zhi, although Nan Tianyong was powerful and held the important position of Soaring Sky Pavilion's supervising deacon, in terms of personality, this person was much easier to deal with than his disciple Yu Zhi. If Lin Yi wanted to provoke him, it would be a piece of cake. In fact, things were indeed developing in the direction that Lin Yi expected. A lowly ant that could be crushed to death at any time was approaching fearlessly in front of everyone. Even if he didn't say anything to provoke the opponent, in Nan Tianyong's eyes, this action in itself was already a provocation. An unforgivable provocation. I will kill that brat, absolutely. Nan Tianyong looked at Lin Yi's leisurely back not far in front of him, and couldn't help but grit his teeth. Not far ahead was the exit of the back street. He had already made up his mind that as long as that brat dared to take a step out, he would immediately kill him. In order to vent his anger, he would do it in the most bloody way possible. However, Yu Zhi, who was watching from the side, felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. After all, no matter how he looked at it, with Nan Tianyong, who was at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation realm, making a move, no matter how smart Lin Yi was, there was absolutely no chance of survival. Could it be that he wanted to provoke this cheap master of his? This thought suddenly flashed through Yu Zhi's mind. If this was really his intention, then his goal was indeed achieved. However, what was the use of this? It would only make him die faster. Indeed, it was easier for people to expose flaws that they wouldn't have in the past when they were angry. However, these flaws were only opportunities for experts of the same level. If it was Nan Tianyong against Lin Er, then no matter how many flaws Nan Tianyong exposed, it would be useless. As for Lin Er, he was only at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation realm. No matter how many opportunities he had, he wouldn't be able to defeat his opponent. This was like if one side was a giant dragon and the other side was an ant. So what if the giant dragon exposed even more fatal flaws? Could the ant take the opportunity to kill the giant dragon? Hong Zhong, who was standing on the second floor of the Hong Merchant Association and witnessing the scene below, could not help but shake his head in amusement. I really don't understand this young man who calls himself Lin Er. However, it seems that this time that idiot called Nan Tianyong is going to suffer again. What Lin Yi had been doing in the Hong Chamber of Commerce for the past 2 hours was something that he, as the owner, had seen very clearly. Chapter 3830. At this moment, without the protection of the experts from the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Hong Zhong had no doubt that Lin Yi could handle this crisis. What he needed to consider now was when to change Lin Yi's normal spiritual jade card to a VIP spiritual jade card. Of course, this was just an idea. With Hong Zhong's status and influence, he could freely use the normal spiritual jade cards. But if it was a higher level VIP spiritual jade card, it must be inspected by the upper echelons of the Merchant Union. Hong Zhong only had a certain degree of recommendation power. Holding a normal spiritual jade card meant that he already had a superior status and strength. Then, holding a VIP spiritual jade card meant that he had already become a big shot, or at least had the potential to become a big shot. In just 2 short encounters, Lin Yi, who was only at the peak of the early stage of the foundational realm, had already successfully obtained Hong Zhong's approval. But if he wanted to go further, he needed to reach a higher level. After all, if he really gave a VIP spiritual jade card, which did not exceed 2 digits in the entire 5 islands of the heaven stage, to a peak of the early stage of the foundational realm, it would really be a joke. After a while, Lin Yi finally stepped out of the boundary of the inner street, and the murderous intent behind him followed. Kid, go to hell! Nan Tianyong did not care about the surprised looks of the inner street guards. Without hesitation, he rushed out and was about to kill Lin Yi with a palm. However, before his palm hit, his vision suddenly blurred. Then he saw that the originally leisurely Lin Yi, in an instant, had accelerated from extreme silence to extreme speed. Butterfly subtle steps and gale chasing lightning boots, at this moment, in the endless flow of people outside, displayed their greatest power. He missed? How is this possible? Yu Jia, who was following behind, saw this scene and couldn't help but be shocked. That palm just now, although his cheap master Nan Tianyong did not use his full strength, he was still a peak of the late stage of the foundational realm. Even if he only showed 10% of his strength, it was not something that a mere peak of the early stage of the foundational realm could handle. However, even if he stood on the opposing side, Yuzha couldn't help but praise Lin Yi's reaction just now. There was almost no acceleration at all. He directly went from a leisurely state to full speed, so that Nan Tianyong's palm actually missed. It was not Lin Yi's absolute speed. It was already fast to the point where it could shake off Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage foundation establishment expert. The reason why it was able to dodge the opponent's attack was entirely due to that inconceivable, hair-raising acceleration. And this point, even Nan Tianyong couldn't do it. It wasn't that Lin Yi had obtained some kind of heaven-defying cheat, nor did he obtain any powerful movement technique. The reason why he was able to do this was entirely due to the little trick he learned during the resistance test. After entering the foundation establishment stage, All of the acupuncture points in his body could already freely release true qi, and on the way to the inner street, Lin Yi secretly accumulated true qi in each of the acupuncture points in his body. Once all the preparations were complete, it shot backwards at full force in an instant. And it was precisely by using this powerful reaction force that Lin Yi was able to explode with that kind of terrifying acceleration in an instant. Only in this way would he be able to get rid of Nan Tianyong's underestimating palm strike. Otherwise, he would already be a dead man by now. Although he had the gale-chasing lightning boots and butterfly micro-steps, the opponent's strength was also there. Lin Yi's own hardware wasn't enough, no matter how good his equipment and skills were. Using the acupuncture points to shoot true qi, this technique wasn't complicated, and in many situations it could often be seen to have miraculous effects. As long as one had a little bit of comprehension and talent, it wasn't difficult to do this, but it might not be practical. There was only one reason. This technique required a large amount of true qi. If the true qi was released too little, it would be very difficult to have miraculous effects. But if it was released too much, it would be very wasteful. After all, the true qi in a normal person's body was very limited. If it couldn't be transformed into a martial technique, it would be an unforgivable waste of power. But Lin Yi was different. For him who sat in the space of the jade pendant, true qi was never a problem. As long as he had the slightest opportunity, he could immediately and continuously replenish it. Therefore, this technique that required a large amount of true qi, but could often have miraculous effects, was simply tailor-made for him. Despicable brat. Nan Tianyong instantly flew into a rage out of humiliation when his sure-kill attack failed. Without another word, he followed with all his strength. He wouldn't have a headache over how the opponent was able to dodge his attack. Since the first attack didn't hit, then he could just attack again. Although Nan Tianyong's brain couldn't be said to be very good. Once he really fought, this fellow's battle instincts were shockingly sharp. He was an out-and-out strong person. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to bear the name of the Nan family's 3 heroes. As a great expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, once Nan Tianyong got serious. Even if he himself wasn't a speed-type expert, his speed was far from what any expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm could match. Even if Yuja didn't have any sincerity towards Nan Tianyong, this cheap master, he firmly believed that Lin Yi definitely wouldn't be able to escape. However, the following development once again exceeded Yuja's expectations. Nan Tianyong was obviously really angry, but he actually couldn't catch up to Lin Yi at the first moment. Luckily, it's just as I expected, or else it would be really difficult today. Lin Yi looked at Nan Tianyong, who was chasing closely behind him, and couldn't help but feel lucky. However, he still didn't dare to relax, because even though he had already used all his strength, he still couldn't shake off his opponent. A place with a lot of people like the market was the place where his butterfly subtle steps and gale-chasing lightning boots could display their greatest power. If it was an expert of the same level, he was afraid that he would be thrown off the street in an instant. However, facing Nan Tianyong, who was at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, although he didn't catch up, the distance between them didn't get any further. On the contrary, Yuja, who was following behind Nan Tianyong, was gradually pulled away. If this continued, he might very quickly fall behind. So this brat is actually this strong. Yuja's heart was instantly shocked, followed by a surge of strong unwillingness. As a middle-stage expert of the Foundation establishment realm, he was actually pulled away by a mere peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. How could he accept this kind of F***king thing? Chapter 38-31. However, just as Yuja's face was filled with hatred as he watched Lin Yi get further and further away, Nan Tianyong suddenly spoke up. "Disciple, go block the entrance of the market. Leave this kid to me. I'd like to see how far this bastard can run." Yu Zhi paused slightly and looked deeply at Lin Yi's receding figure. He then nodded and turned in another direction without hesitation. Although he couldn't guess which direction Lin Yi would run in next, to Yu Zhi, he only needed to take a shortcut to get to any exit ahead of time. If he could block the exit, that would be even better. If he chose the wrong exit, then it didn't matter. Anyway, his master, Nan Tianyong, was personally watching. This Lin, second, couldn't run away. He just had to waste a bit more time on him. Sensing that the two people behind him had split up, Lin Yi's heart couldn't help but tremble. The reason he could maintain his speed and not be caught by Nan Tianyong was because of the flow of people. However, at the same time there was a disadvantage. If it was a remote place, even if the two people split up, it wouldn't matter much because Lin Yi could easily find the other's tracks with his intuition. However, in this noisy market, it was unrealistic to want to pay attention to Yu Zhi's location while facing the huge pressure brought by Nan Tianyong. Gritting his teeth, Lin Yi didn't pay attention to Yu Zhi and focused on getting rid of Nan Tianyong. Although he knew what the other wanted to do and what kind of threat the other would pose to him, once the other guessed the direction he would choose to escape in, then he would have to face a pincer attack from the front and back. After the last fight, Lin Yi wasn't afraid of Yu Zhi in a one-on-one fight. However, the other was a middle-stage foundation establishment realm master who was one level higher than him. It wasn't hard to hold him back for a short period of time, but if he was delayed for even a moment, then there would only be one ending for Lin Yi, death without a burial. After all, Nan Tianyong's peak late-stage foundation establishment realm strength wasn't something to joke about. If the distance was just a bit closer, then he would already be dead. Lin Yi was well aware of this point. However, it was precisely because of this that Lin Yi had no time to pay attention to Yu Zhi. Compared to this unknown risk, the real threat of Nan Tianyong behind him was more terrifying and fatal. But even if we go all out to guard against him, it's still not enough. This Nan Tianyong is really hard to deal with. Taking advantage of the gap in the crowd, Lin Yi took the time to glance behind him, and his heart shivered again. The gap that Chen Feng had created by using his acupoints to shoot out his jinqi had actually been forcefully shortened. Although the distance that he had shortened was very limited, it was still shortened. There was no doubt about it. Even though Lin Yi's butterfly, subtle steps, and gale chasing lightning boots had reached their maximum speed under the cover of the crowd, he was still not faster than his opponent. Even a layman could see that Nan Tianyong wasn't the type that excelled in speed. However, under the huge disparity in level, his speed was still not something that Lin Yi, a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert, could match. Thinking of this, Lin Yi couldn't help but rejoice in his heart. Fortunately, this was a crowded market. If he wasn't afraid of the experts in the crowd, this guy would have already caught up. Originally, with Nan Tianyong's overbearing temper, if ordinary people dared to block his way, he would have already started a massacre. Then, even if Lin Yi relied on the butterfly's subtle steps, there would be no way for him to not be caught. Unfortunately, this wasn't a bustling market for ordinary people, but a market exclusive to cultivators. The people passing by might only be heaven stage experts. Perhaps he would be an expert of the foundation establishment stage, or even a super expert above the foundation establishment stage. Therefore, even if Nan Tianyong had the strength of a peak late-stage foundation establishment, even if his temper was fiery and overbearing, he wouldn't dare to go crazy in this kind of situation. Otherwise, if he incurred the wrath of the crowd, or if he simply provoked some great god hidden in the crowd, then forget about killing Lin Yi, he would die here first. But even if he didn't dare to burst out with full speed because of the crowd, Nan Tianyong still used his absolute advantage in speed to catch up little by little. If this continued, who knew when he would be caught up? Looks like I have to end this quickly. Lin Yi's heart moved, not only because he would be caught up if this continued, but more importantly, the thing condensed on his palm had already begun to move. If he forced it to stay in his hand for too long, it would be a big problem. After observing the direction for a while, Lin Yi immediately used the crowd as a cover. Without any hesitation, he jumped directly to one of the market's exits. His figure was as fast as a ghost, constantly flashing in the crowd. Lin Yi quickly arrived at the exit, but there was already a familiar figure waiting in front of him. Yu Zhe, you didn't expect this, right? Even the heavens didn't help you. You're really unlucky. Yu Zhe greeted him with a sinister smile. There were a total of 4 exits in the market's outer street and middle street. Even if Lin Yi was under too much pressure from Nan Tianyong and couldn't choose every exit as he pleased, there were at least 2 or more choices. Because Yu Zhe took a shortcut and arrived early, he couldn't know Lin Yi's choice and couldn't change it midway. Therefore, even Yu Zhe didn't have much confidence in whether or not he could stop Lin Yi. After all, the possibility of this gamble being successful was really not high. As for Lin Yi himself, he wasn't too worried about this. His attention was completely focused on Nan Tianyong behind him. But a scene that no one expected happened, just like that. Yu Zhe made the gamble, and what Lin Yi was facing next was a dead end from a pincer attack. After a period of relentless pursuit, Nan Tianyong was only 15 feet away from Lin Yi. This bit of distance was almost within reach for an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. If Yu Zhe in front of him was slightly obstructed, then Lin Yi would die without a doubt. After all, this wasn't like the moment when he walked out of the inner street. Nan Tianyong behind him was already moving at full speed. If Lin Yi's speed was slightly slower, then forget about escaping like before. The result would be a slap to death. And for Yu Zhe, who was in the middle stage of the Foundation establishment realm, even if he was humiliated and almost killed by Lin Yi last time, if he just wanted to obstruct Lin Yi, then it couldn't be any easier. Chapter 38-32. You stole my staring stone and almost caused me to go see the King of Hell. Now I can finally properly settle this debt. 24 forms of the deadly chain sword. This guy's got quite a bit of resentment in him. Lin Yi's eyes narrowed. Although he had almost killed his opponent last time, this Yu Zhe was definitely a very troublesome existence. Even if it was one-on-one, Lin Yi would have a hard time dealing with him. Now, there was an even more terrifying Nan Tianyong chasing after him. Seeing the change in Lin Yi's expression, Yu Zhe felt a wave of relief wash over him. He could finally release all the pent-up frustration he'd been holding in for a month. Bastard Lin, second, go die. The star ink stone is destined to be mine. In the blink of an eye, the sword energy of the 24 forms of the deadly chain sword had completely condensed at his fingertips. Just as Yu Zhe was about to cut his opponent in half, he saw Lin Yi's figure suddenly pause. Do you still want to retreat now? Is there a hole in your brain? There are only 2 outcomes for you, kid. Either you die under my master's palm, or you die under my sword aura. There's no third option. Yu Zhe laughed coldly as he raised his finger, about to unleash his sword aura and cut Lin Yi in half. But what he didn't expect was that Lin Yi didn't regret or dodge before he slashed out with his sword. Instead, Lin Yi sped up and charged at him without a word. How is this possible? Seeing the distance between Lin Yi and himself instantly shrink from 30 feet to 3 feet, Yu Zhe, who had already planned to cut Lin Yi in half, was so scared that he almost shit his pants. Only now did he realize that the reason why Lin Yi seemed to pause was not because he was preparing to retreat, but because he was accumulating energy to increase his speed further. This guy must be on drugs. Under the full pursuit of his master, Nan Tianyong, he should have used all his strength and shouldn't have held back. How could he increase his speed again at this time? What he didn't know was that Lin Yi's instantaneous acceleration was exactly the same as the method he used to get rid of Nan Tianyong at the inner street entrance. Once again, he used the technique of injecting true qi from his acupoints. Although he had already pushed the speed of the butterfly's subtle steps and the gale-chasing lightning boots to the extreme. Because of the existence of this technique, As long as there was a constant supply of vital energy, theoretically he could achieve unlimited acceleration. Even if he had reached the extreme of his own speed, it would not be a problem. Of course, with an ordinary person's vital chi reserves, it would be a crime to use such a technique even once. Naturally, it was impossible for there to be a second time. However, Lin Yi was different. He had a heaven-defying golden finger like the space in the jade pendant, so he had no worries in terms of real qi. As long as the technique of injecting qi through acupoints was effective, he would not be stingy even if he had to use it 3 or 4 times. Because of this sudden acceleration, Lin Yi had truly caught Yuzha off guard. The distance between them was less than 3 feet. Even though Yuzha had already condensed a sword chi killer move at his fingertips, he did not have time to release it at this moment. More importantly, based on the battle instincts of a mid-stage foundation establishment expert, Yuzha suddenly felt a trace of extreme danger from Lin Yi. This feeling, it was as if he would immediately become a dead man if he stayed next to this guy for even a second longer. One had to know that even from his master, Nan Tianyong, who was a peak late-stage foundation establishment expert, Yuzha had never felt such a heart-palpitating power. His instincts towards danger never lied. Could it be that this Lin second still had some kind of extremely terrifying killer move hidden on him? He was already scared stiff by Lin Yi's instantaneous acceleration, and then he had such a frightening sense of danger. Yuzha was instantly scared out of his wits. Even though he knew that if he slightly hindered Lin Yi, the other party would die for sure, he still subconsciously chose to retreat. Compared to taking the opportunity to delay Lin Yi and wash away his shame, Yuzha clearly valued his own life more. After all, if he died, then everything would be over. As for Lin Yi, it was fine even if he let him go for now. Nan Tianyong was behind him anyway. This brat could not escape at all. Seeing Yuzha take the initiative to admit defeat, Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh lightly. You took the initiative to make way for me? Then I really have to thank you for not killing me. I will never forget your kindness. As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Yi completely ignored Yuzha, who was fuming with anger. With another acceleration, he directly swept past Yuzha. In the blink of an eye, he had already left Yuzha far behind. Are you F** king crazy? Such a good opportunity. Why the F** CK did you give way to him? Nan Tianyong, who was chasing closely, almost twisted his mouth in anger when he saw the scene. Separated by layers of people, he chased all the way from the inner street entrance to the market entrance. But he still couldn't catch up to a mere peak early-stage foundation establishment realm master. In addition, he was previously provoked by Lin Yi in the inner street, so Nan Tianyong had a stomach full of anger. After seeing Yuzha gamble, Nan Tianyong originally thought that this time Lin Yi had no chance of escaping from death. He didn't expect that this kind of unsolvable deadlock from the front and back was actually inexplicably given up by his own disciple. Yuzha grinned awkwardly, but he couldn't say anything. After all, even if his intuition was that kind of extremely fatal danger, no matter what, in this kind of situation where he had the absolute advantage, he was scared off by a mere peak early-stage foundation establishment realm master. This was really a bit unreasonable. But luckily, Nan Tianyong only scolded him once, and then continued to ignore him. This was because he still had to chase after Lin Yi in front of him. This was such a great opportunity. The two of them, a peak late-stage foundation establishment realm master and a middle-stage foundation establishment realm master, actually let Lin Yi escape. Then this old man would really have no place to put his face. After leaving the crowded market, there were no more obstructing passers-by. Nan Tianyong's speed obviously increased by a lot. Even Lin Yi, who was accelerated by the vital energy from his meridians, was far inferior to him. If it wasn't for the fact that Yuzha took the initiative to give way, Nan Tianyong might have been able to quickly catch up to Lin Yi in 3 breaths of time. And even now, as long as he spent double the time, He would definitely be able to catch up and kill him in one move. Chapter 38-33. Unfortunately for Lin Yi, the biggest threat wasn't Yu Jia, but Nan Tianyong, who was at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm. Without the cover of people, it's impossible to escape like this. Lin Yi frowned as he looked at Nan Tianyong, who was already very close behind him. Although he had already expected this outcome, he still felt a little helpless when he truly felt the disparity between them. If he hadn't prepared his killer move in advance at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, it would have been unrealistic for him to escape from an expert at the peak of the late Foundation establishment realm with his current strength. In the blink of an eye, Nan Tianyong was only 10 feet behind Lin Yi. At this distance, no one could escape his attack, not even a master of the same level, let alone a weakling like an ant. Wah-ha! Run, keep running. If a lowly ant like you can escape from my palm, I'll twist my head off and let you use it as a urinal. Nan Tianyong laughed wildly. Without any preparation, he stretched out his hand to kill Lin Yi. A murderous intent quickly shrouded Lin Yi's head. Although Nan Tianyong didn't use any martial arts, in terms of pure lethality, it was above just 24 consecutive sword forms. More importantly, it wasn't like martial arts, which had all sorts of restrictions. He could change it as he pleased, and it was impossible to defend against. No matter how simple and crude his brain was, Nan Tianyong was an experienced master. He knew that when the difference in levels was large enough, the best way to bully noobs wasn't to use powerful martial arts. On the contrary, simple punches and kicks were more invulnerable, and people didn't even know how to escape. Unexpectedly, faced with the murderous intent above his head, Lin Yi didn't seem to notice it at all. Instead, he calmly turned his head to Nan Tianyong and said, "Urinal? Then I'm sorry. Your head really isn't good looking. I don't like it. I'm afraid I won't be able to pee." F***CK. Nan Tianyong was so angry that his beard trembled, and he was about to slap Lin Yi to death, sharp-tongued brat. Go to hell for this great master. Is that so? Lin Yi didn't escape. Instead, he stopped and said with a faint smile, "Why don't we make a bet to see who will die first? Come. How about showing Senior Nan something fun?" Nan Tianyong was slightly taken aback, and his hands could not help but stop moving. Surprisingly, Lin Yi didn't even try to dodge. With a turn of his hand, he launched a palm strike at him. Seeing this, he couldn't help but sneer. "Overconfident fool. Your lethality is like that of an ant to me." However, before he finished speaking, Nan Tianyong suddenly felt an inexplicable tremble from the bottom of his heart. Only then did he realize that Lin Yi's action was not aimed at him, but seemed to be holding something in his hand. Furthermore, that thing seemed to be a condensation of endless true qi. The indescribable might hidden within it actually caused even him, a peak late-stage Foundation establishment expert, to unconsciously feel fear. It wasn't until this moment that Nan Tianyong suddenly realized why his disciple, Yu Jia, took the initiative to give way to the opponent. After all, in terms of hatred, Yu Jia and this Lin Yi were irreconcilable enemies, far above his master who was involved in this matter. It would be strange if Yu Jia wasn't afraid of this kind of dangerous thing that even he felt inexplicably fearful of. Even though he felt that it was too humiliating, Nan Tianyong subconsciously wanted to withdraw at this moment. Although he didn't know what Lin Yi was up to, his intuition towards danger wouldn't lie. If he were to sacrifice himself to kill a mere early-stage Foundation establishment ant, that wouldn't be worth it. However, even if Nan Tianyong already knew the situation and wanted to withdraw, Lin Yi simply wouldn't give him this opportunity. The thing in his hand was immediately thrown out, under Nan Tianyong's incomparably terrified gaze. This thing that was condensed with endless true qi instantly exploded, less than a foot away from him. Boom! An earth-shattering sound shook the ground within a radius of dozens of miles. In the market not far from here, Countless stalls outside the shops were shaken to the point that they fell apart on the street. All the cultivators' expressions changed, and all of them had a look of fear on their faces. Even the guest experts of the many shops in the inner street couldn't help but be surprised. Even if they went all out, they might not be able to cause such a big movement. Only Hong Zhong of the Hong Chamber of Commerce seemed to have expected this earthquake. However, even so, at this moment, when he really felt this earth-shattering movement, he couldn't help but be startled and speechless. It's indeed a big move that took an entire hour. This Lin Yi is really something. Han Zhong shook his head with a smile. He didn't think he was an ordinary person, but compared with Lin Yi, he was still too far behind. At least when he was at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, he couldn't deal with a master at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, and he didn't have such a heaven-defying method. Not to mention the uproar in the market. At this moment, the center of the explosion had flattened several surrounding hills, and it created a circular pit that was more than 100 feet deep. It gave people the feeling that it was a sinkhole that was smashed by a meteorite from outer space. Because of the dust generated by the explosion, it covered the sky and did not disperse for a long time. It seemed that, at least for the next day, it would be difficult for the dust to settle. After a moment, a figure suddenly sprang out from the dust and fled without saying a word. This figure was the one who caused the earth to shake and the mountains to shake. Lin Yi. True Qi has been held for an entire hour. This kind of true Qi bomb is really not for humans to play with. At this moment, even Lin Yi himself had a lingering fear. That's right. In order to deal with Nan Tianyong, a master at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, Lin Yi deliberately stayed at the Hong Chamber of Commerce for an entire hour. There was only one purpose, which was to condense the true Qi bomb. In the past, when he was in the secular world, the true Qi bomb had always been Lin Yi's specialty. He had often used it to deter and deal with powerful enemies. Moreover, because of the huge destructive power that far exceeded his own strength level, this move could be said to be tried and tested. However, although the true Qi bomb was powerful, it had an unavoidable fatal flaw, which was that it needed to be charged. The higher the level of the opponent, the longer the charging time. Otherwise, if the charging time was not enough, it would lead to insufficient true Qi. The true Qi bomb that was thrown would naturally not be powerful enough to achieve the desired effect. Chapter 38-34. However, the biggest advantage of the true Qi bomb was that it could create a destructive power that was above its level. If it was a martial arts skill, then no matter how much true Qi there was, the upper limit of the power it could display was 10. This was limited by the level of strength. However, the true Qi bomb was different. As long as there was enough true Qi, then the final power created could reach 15 or even 20 or even more. Of course, there were advantages and disadvantages. The premise of the explosive power not only required a large amount of true Qi, but also enough time to accumulate power in advance. However, this was simply unrealistic in actual combat. After all, the opponent would not foolishly stand there and wait for you to make a true Qi bomb and then throw it at his head, right? Previously, when Lin Yi was in the secular world, apart from using it in actual combat, the main use of the true Qi bomb was for deterrence. Its nature was basically equivalent to that of a nuclear weapon. Although the true Qi bomb did not have much value in actual combat, it was simply a tailor-made and excellent method to turn the situation around in order to solve Lin Yi's current predicament. He had long known that Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhu were waiting for him. As long as he took a step out of the inner street, he would definitely face a cruel and relentless pursuit. Although Nan Tianyong and Yu Zhu wished that they could tear Lin Yi into pieces, they did not dare to do so in the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, as long as he stayed in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi could peacefully hold his true Qi bomb. However, for Lin Yi, things were easy to handle. He would try his best to hold the true Qi bomb in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, and then throw it at Nan Tianyong's head. What kind of concept was it to condense a true qi bomb for an entire hour? Lin Yi was constantly condensing and replenishing his true qi at the same time. Anyway, there was enough time and no one to disturb him. Lin Yi only stopped when he was almost unable to control it. Even Lin Yi himself had never done such a crazy thing. Although the true qi bomb could theoretically condense true qi infinitely, its power could also be increased infinitely. But the prerequisite was that he had to be able to control it. Even if it was a true qi bomb, it was still a bomb. The more true qi one gathered, the more powerful it would be. However, at the same time, it would be harder to control. Once it exceeded the upper limit of one's control, if one was even slightly careless during the process, it was very likely that it would explode in one's own hands before being thrown at someone else's head. As for how powerful the Zhen Qi bomb he could control, Lin Yi had never tested it before, so he naturally did not know. But this time, the arrow on the bowstring had to be fired. Even if he knew there was a risk, he had to do it. After all, Nan Tianyong was an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, which was 4 levels higher than Lin Yi. In the face of such a great disparity in strength, even if it was a true qi bomb that could be used against enemies of a higher level, if it could not be held for a long time, it would be very difficult for it to be effective. Lin Yi only had one chance. If the qi bomb didn't kill the opponent, he'd be killed. There would not be a second chance. There was only one outcome waiting for him, and that was death. Therefore, Lin Yi crazily held it for a whole hour, obviously feeling that the Zhen Qi bomb was starting to become a little unstable and had reached the limit of his control. He finally walked out of the Hong Chamber of Commerce and faced it at a close distance, provoking Nan Tianyong and Yu Jie out of the same concerns as Nan Tianyong. Lin Yi didn't dare throw this qi bomb in the crowded market. After all, once this thing left his hand, it would explode. After all, once this thing left his hand, it was not something he could control. At that time, not only would he hurt innocent people, but he would also easily provoke experts that he could not afford to provoke. Therefore, Lin Yi used all his means and exerted all his strength to lure Nan Tianyong out of the market, and then threw this super Zhen Qi bomb that he had been holding for a whole hour at his face. The Zhen Qi bomb was a move that killed people indiscriminately. Although whether or not Lin Yi could kill Nan Tianyong was still a question mark, he could at least be sure that this Zhen Qi bomb would absolutely not have a problem killing him. At the same time that he threw the Zhen Qi bomb, Lin Yi did not hesitate to use all the Zhen Qi in his body to wrap himself up tightly, and then used all his strength to escape from the center of the explosion. Even though Lin Yi was already so careful, his current state was really unbearably embarrassing. Even the word embarrassing could not be used to describe it, and could only be used with another word: miserable. His whole body was scorched black, and there were many places that were badly mutilated. Although, in fact, he did not exchange even half a move with the opponent, the injuries on Lin Yi's body at the moment were far worse than when he fought with Yu Jie, a middle-stage foundation establishment stage expert, last time. And Lin Yi was only affected by the aftermath of his Zhen Qi bomb, and he had used Zhen Qi to defend himself in advance. On the other hand, Nan Tianyong, who was completely unprepared, was directly thrown in the face by Lin Yi's Zhen Qi bomb. The miserable state of this dignified peak late stage foundation establishment stage expert could be imagined. With a full 4 levels of suppression, as long as Nan Tianyong was a little bit on guard, the strongest killing move of any peak early stage foundation establishment stage expert would be a joke in front of him, and it was impossible for him to be injured at all. Therefore, to say that he did not underestimate Lin Yi when facing him was absolutely a lie. It was also because he underestimated the opponent that this time he was really fooled by Lin Yi. In order to ensure that the Zhen Qi bomb in his hand could explode the opponent, Lin Yi did not hesitate to put himself in danger. Otherwise, if they were too far apart, with Nan Tianyong's strength, he could completely react in time and then respond. But now that the two of them were so close, no matter how strong Nan Tianyong was, he did not have the chance to react. The super Zhen bomb that he had been holding back for a whole hour was thrown in his face without warning. Nan Tianyong only had time to curse, and then there was a loud noise and his vision went black. A dignified peak late-stage foundation establishment stage expert was fooled by Lin Yi just like that, and without saying anything he was directly beaten to the ground. He did not know whether he was dead or alive. With the cover of the aftermath of the Zhen bomb and the dust that filled the sky, Lin Yi did not care whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive. The only thing he needed to do now was to run. Even if this opportunity was very rare, Lin Yi should cut the weeds and root out the roots of Nan Tianyong and Yuzhe. Otherwise, the next time he met these two people, it would be very difficult for him to have a whole hour to hold the Zhen bomb like this time. At that time, he would have no strength to fight back at all. Chapter 38-35. Other than Nan Tianyong, who was fooled by him, there was also Yuzhe, who was in the middle stage of the foundation establishment realm. Just now, Yuzhe was quite a distance away from the two of them. Even if he was hit by the true Qi bomb, his injuries were far less serious than Lin Yi, who was at the center of the explosion. If Lin Yi dared to turn around, then there was no doubt that he would definitely die in Yuzhe's hands. Lin Yi didn't dare to turn around. In reality, Yuzhe had already pissed his pants. Due to the distance, Yuzhe didn't suffer any serious injuries from the true Qi bomb. However, after seeing Nan Tianyong, who was a peak late-stage foundation establishment realm expert, get knocked down by Lin Yi in one move, he was truly afraid this time. If Lin Yi turned around at this time, he might not even dare to attack Lin Yi. Instead, he might turn around and run. Knocking down Nan Tianyong in one move was 2F** king exaggerated. According to normal people's logic, if Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage foundation establishment realm expert, couldn't withstand one move from him, then wouldn't Yuzhe, a mere middle-stage foundation establishment realm expert, not even be enough to fill the gaps between his teeth? It wasn't that Lin Yi didn't consider this possibility, but from the last exchange, he could see that Yuzhe wasn't a simple character. If he wasn't scared away and was instead seen through, then it would really be a joke. Other than safety, Lin Yi's decision to turn around and leave had a deeper concern, and that was the impact of killing Nan Tianyong. Nan Tianyong's identity, other than being Yuzhe's master and a peak late-stage foundation establishment realm expert, was also the supervising deacon of Soaring Sky Pavilion. This was a very sensitive matter. Once something happened, it would definitely attract the attention of the 3 pavilions and the enforcement hall. Last time, the guest experts of the Hong Chamber of Commerce didn't really make a move on him because of this concern. If Lin Yi used the true Qi bomb to directly kill him this time, then there was nothing much to say. He turned around and ran without hesitation. However, if he wanted to confirm whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive, then it would be a stupid choice. Leaving aside the possibility of being killed by Yuzhe, and even if Nan Tianyong didn't die, he could still be killed by Nan Tianyong. Even if he didn't consider these two risks, it wouldn't be a good thing even if he managed to kill Nan Tianyong. At that time, if the higher-ups of the 3 great pavilions and the law enforcement hall were alerted, they would send people everywhere to dig 3 feet into the ground. Then his identity as Lin Yi might be exposed, and that would be troublesome. Under the shroud of dust, Yuzhe's heart trembled for a long time, but he didn't see Lin Yi turn around. Only then did he relax a little. Then he slapped himself twice regretfully. With Yuzhe's intelligence, since he realized that Lin Yi didn't dare to come back, he could easily guess that Lin Yi wasn't in a good state right now. It was very likely that such a heaven-defying killing move could only be used once. Because in theory, if Nan Tianyong was blown to such a state, then Lin Yi definitely wouldn't be any better. If he had directly chased after him, he would have had a very good chance of killing him. But now, it was too late to say anything. Lin Yi had already disappeared without a trace. Even if Yuzhe wanted to chase, he didn't know which direction to go. He could only give up. Master, how are you? After coming to his senses, Other than slapping himself, the first thing Yuzha did was confirm whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive. He searched for a long time in the deep pit under his feet. Yuzha finally found the dying Nan Tianyong in the center of the mud. Although he wasn't far from death, he was still an expert at the peak of the late stage of the foundation establishment stage. Even if he was destroyed by a super true energy bomb at such a close distance, he was still able to hang on to his last breath. His life force was far beyond that of a normal person. TCH, he actually didn't die. Seeing this, Yuzha couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. Although Nan Tianyong was his master and his backer, in this kind of situation, he actually wanted Nan Tianyong to die. As long as Nan Tianyong died, this matter would definitely blow up. At that time, this Lin second who had come out of nowhere would definitely be unable to hide. At that time, as long as he grasped the right opportunity, he would still have a chance to take back the Star Inkstone. Apart from that, Nan Tianyong was an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. Any item on him was a precious treasure that could only be chanced upon by luck. If Nan Tianyong became a corpse now, then all the treasures on him would belong to Yuzha. Not only could he make a windfall, but he could also blow the matter up so that Lin heir would have nowhere to hide. At this moment, if he could kill his cheap master, Nan Tianyong, it would be killing two birds with one stone for Yuzha. Yuzha narrowed his eyes, and killing intent flickered within them. In any case, this old fellow was already on the verge of death and wasn't far from death. Why not to send him on his way? Heaven, earth, monarch, and teacher. The teacher is like a father. Killing the teacher is like killing the father. However, something like killing one's teacher, no matter where it was placed, and if it was discovered, one would definitely be spurned by the world. But what if it wasn't discovered? At this moment, there was no one around. Only Yuzha and his dying master, Nan Tianyong. Even if he hardened his heart and killed his master, no one would know. What's more, he could very well push all the blame onto Lin Yi's head. After all, with such a super killing move that had never been seen before, even if it killed a peak late-stage Foundation establishment realm expert, people would still believe it if he said it. Moreover, if Yuzha really said it like that, then perhaps even Lin Yi himself would believe it, because he had no chance to confirm whether or not Nan Tianyong had already been killed by his super chi bomb. He would never have thought that in the end, Nan Tianyong would actually die at the hands of his own disciple. He slowly walked to Nan Tianyong's side. At this moment, Nan Tianyong's body was mostly buried in the mud, and his breath was already as weak as a normal person's. The thought of killing his master grew stronger and stronger in Yuzha's mind. In the end, Yuzha grimaced and secretly gritted his teeth. In front of benefits, he could even kill his own father, let alone a cheap master. Since you're already so heavily injured, rather than wasting resources by living, why not give all these resources to your disciple, me? Don't worry. Your disciple will avenge you, master. Yuzha's eyes carried a cold light, and at the tip of his finger, a ray of sword chi quietly condensed. Chapter 38-36. Being swept by Nan Tianyong's gaze, Yuzha's heart couldn't help but tremble, even though he knew that his cheap master was extremely weak. He quickly hid the sword chi behind his back. Even though Yuzha often interacted with Nan Tianyong, he didn't know how strong a peak late-stage Foundation establishment realm expert was. In Yuzha's eyes, it was still unknown whether or not Nan Tianyong still had the ability to kill in his dying state. Although the temptation of killing his master was very big, Yuzha didn't dare to act rashly before confirming Nan Tianyong's true state. "Master, how are you now? Are your injuries serious?" Yuzha hid the sword chi behind his back and pretended to be worried as he asked. After a long while, Nan Tianyong didn't speak. Or, strictly speaking, he couldn't speak at all at this moment. It was already extremely difficult for him to maintain his last trace of weak breath. If he were to force himself to speak, he would probably die before he could catch his breath. The super chi bomb that Lin Yi had held back for a whole hour was, after all, not just for show. This kind of power was enough to pose a fatal threat to any peak, late-stage Foundation establishment realm expert. Moreover, Nan Tianyong was hit by Lin Yi's true chi bomb because he underestimated his opponent. He wasn't prepared at all and was even hit in the face by Lin Yi. With such a close distance and such a terrifying attack, Nan Tianyong was able to survive and still hang on to his last breath. This was already very impressive for him. If it was any other expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, they would have already become a corpse by now. They might not even have a whole corpse left. Seeing that Nan Tianyong couldn't speak at all, Yuja felt a bit more at ease. He sneakily took out his sword chi. After all, killing one's master was too disgraceful. Even though Yuja already had this plan, when the time came, he still couldn't help but tremble in panic. Che, what's there to be afraid of? One slash of the sword will bring at least 50 years of hard work. Yu just secretly cheered himself on. He took a deep breath and prepared to behead his cheat master. However, at this moment, from the direction of the market, there was a sudden sound of footsteps and noise. Yu was shocked and immediately reacted. These people should have been attracted by the huge movement just now. As expected, the sound of discussion got closer and closer. Look ahead, a few mountains have collapsed. This is nothing. Look at this deep pit. F***CK, what kind of expert is this? It can't be a Foundation establishment great circle, right? There seems to be someone in front. This time, Yuja instantly panicked. If there was no one around, then he would kill his cheat master. As long as he pushed the blame onto Lin Yi, it would indeed be a win-win situation. However, in this current situation, if he dared to do that under the watchful eyes of so many people, he would definitely be consigned to eternal damnation once he was noticed by any observant person. Killing one's master. However, if even the slightest bit of information was leaked, he would definitely become the target of public criticism. At that time, not only would the 3 great pavilions want to kill him, if Nan Tianyong's relatives and friends wanted to kill him, even these onlookers would besiege him under the banner of justice. From then on, he, Yu Jia, would be the public enemy of the world. There would be no place for him to hide. If he was so strong that he was invincible, then so be it. At most, his reputation would be ruined. However, Yu Jia was only in the middle stage of the Foundation establishment realm. If he was accused of killing his master, then without a doubt his entire life would be ruined. There would be no chance for him to make a comeback. With such a temptation in front of him, killing Nan Tianyong would be worth 50 years of cultivation. He could also make a big deal out of this and use the 3 great pavilions to force Lin Yi into a corner. If he missed this chance, he would never have such a chance again in his next life. Yu Jia was unwilling to give up just like that. Seeing that the onlookers were getting closer and closer, Yu Jia gritted his teeth and decisively dug Nan Tianyong out from the ground and carried him on his back. Without another word, he turned and ran. "Someone's running!" an onlooker with good eyesight shouted, causing commotion. However, they had no idea what was going on. Even if there were people who wanted to take advantage of the situation, they didn't dare to chase after him. The commotion just now was far too exaggerated. Conservatively speaking, it would take at least an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm to be able to create such a huge commotion. Even if the 2 sides were to fight to the death, it was still not something that the people present could deal with. To be able to fight against a peak Foundation establishment realm expert, even if the opponent was heavily injured, one would need to be at least at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm. Only then would they have the confidence to take advantage of the situation. Otherwise, it was very likely that they wouldn't get any benefits and would instead lose their lives. However, peak Foundation establishment realm experts weren't common people on the streets, at least not in the outer streets of the city. Because of the huge commotion just now, although there were many onlookers who were attracted over, none of them had such strength. As for the others, they didn't have the strength, so they naturally didn't have the guts to act rashly. In the cultivation world, although the weak were prey to the strong, and it wasn't strange for people to take advantage of the situation, the prerequisite was that they had the strength to do so. It was also because of this that Yuja was able to smoothly take Nan Tianyong away. Otherwise, with his mid-foundation establishment realm strength and his injuries, it would be very difficult for him to escape unscathed in front of so many onlookers. Carrying the dying Nan Tianyong on his back, Yuja didn't run too far. He came to a secluded corner and immediately stopped. Taking a deep breath, the killing intent in Yuja's eyes was even more resolute than before. The reason why Yuja brought Nan Tianyong to this secluded place wasn't because he gave up on the idea of killing his master. On the contrary, the only reason he did this was to get rid of the onlookers and not let them ruin his plans. Because Nan Tianyong and Yuja often appeared in the city these days, even these onlookers could easily recognize them. Therefore, Yuja didn't even think that he wouldn't be recognized. Once he was recognized, it would be very easy for him to leave a hidden danger if he wanted to do anything. No matter how covert his action of killing Nan Tianyong was, it was still very risky. Therefore, Yuja carried Nan Tianyong away in front of so many people not to hide his identity. At this time, he only wanted to hide one thing, and that was Nan Tianyong's life and death. Chapter 38-37. As long as no one could see whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive, then when they ran to a secluded place with no one around, even if Nan Tianyong really killed his cheat master, he could push the blame onto Lin Yi without leaving any flaws. Everything that happened just now was exactly as Yuja expected. The onlookers didn't have the guts to chase after them, and with their distance, they had no way of confirming whether Nan Tianyong was dead or alive. They would only think that Yuja was afraid that someone would take advantage of the situation. So, out of caution, he carried Nan Tianyong away. Everything was within Yuja's control. Then, no one will disturb us now. Are you ready to be on your way, my master? The sinister smile on Yuja's face sent chills down people's spines. Nan Tianyong, who was originally on the verge of death and couldn't sense what was going on outside, suddenly seemed to realize something and opened his eyes. Then, Nan Tianyong grabbed Yuja's ankle without any warning and said weakly, "Go, on our way?" "On what way?" Being grabbed by Nan Tianyong like this, Yuja instantly broke out in a cold sweat and had goosebumps all over his body. Even someone as scheming as him couldn't help but feel his mind go blank at this moment. Nan Tianyong was a true peak, late-stage foundation establishment realm master. Even if he was on the verge of death, if he had a final burst of energy and used a killing move, then Yuja, a middle-stage foundation establishment realm master, wouldn't be able to handle it. However, after waiting nervously for a moment, he realized that Nan Tianyong didn't make any follow-up movements. After carefully looking at his pale face, Yuja's hanging heart finally fell to the ground. Although he still had some misgivings in his heart, at this moment, the arrow on the bow had to be fired. After all, he had already said what he wanted to say, and it was already too late to turn back. Even if Nan Tianyong was currently in a state of near death, he might not be able to clearly hear what Yuja said just now, and even if he heard it now, he might not be able to remember it afterwards. However, Yuja didn't dare to take this risk. It was true that Nan Tianyong's brain was simple, but as a peak, late-stage foundation establishment realm master, could it be that he was an incurable idiot? What if this guy had already completely understood his plan and was just trying to confuse him? What if he was deliberately acting and preparing to settle the score later? Even if the possibility wasn't high, if it really became a reality, then he would be better off dead. Whatever. Whether it's a meteoric rise or a failure at the last step, I have to take this gamble. After realizing this, killing intent condensed in Yuja's eyes. He no longer cared if Nan Tianyong had a final burst of energy before death. A sword chi from his fingertip pierced towards Nan Tianyong's chest. You. Nan Tianyong only had time to say half a word. His eyes were filled with disbelief, and he used the last bit of his strength to resist. Unfortunately, even an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm like him could no longer move after being hit in the face by Lin Yi's super, true chi bomb. After all, he was able to hang on to his last breath. This in itself was already a rare miracle. Puchi, accompanied by the muffled sound of flesh being cut, the sword chi at Yu's fingertip directly stabbed into Nan Tianyong's heart, and then twisted 360 degrees, viciously twisting. Nan Tianyong's body suddenly trembled. The hand that was grabbing onto Yu's ankle tightly clenched, as if he had used up the last of his strength. Unfortunately, a great expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm didn't have any strength to fight back at this time. Forget about the final burst of energy before death. Even heavily injuring Yu was unrealistic. At most, he would leave a green mark on Yu's ankle, which was of no use at all. You won't have a good death. Someone will avenge me. Before he finished speaking, Nan Tianyong's neck crooked, and he actually died. TCH, someone will avenge you? Yu just spent a lot of effort to pry off Nan Tianyong's hand that was grabbing onto his ankle. He sneered and said, "There is indeed someone who will avenge you. The three heroes of the Nan family are not just for show. However, the person who killed you is called Lin Air, right?" There was no one around, and no one saw that it was him, Yu Jia, who did it. Moreover, the wound caused by his sword chi was no different from the wound caused by Lin Yi's true energy bomb. It was completely possible to push the blame onto Lin Yi, and it would be difficult for others to see any flaws. Pausing for a moment, Yu just saw that although Nan Tianyong was already dead, his pair of eyes were still staring at him. He couldn't help but secretly curse at his bad luck. Humph! Die with grievances. Yu curled his lips in ridicule. My cheap master, you don't have to die with grievances. Your disciple, I, will personally ask your two brothers to avenge you. But before that, your disciple will reluctantly take over the treasures on your body. Finished speaking, Yu's eyes suddenly revealed a look of greed, and then he bent down and searched Nan Tianyong from head to toe. Once was not enough, he even searched 2 or 3 times, until everything on his body was clean. Only then did he finally stop. A man can't be rich without a windfall, and a horse can't be fat without grass at night. This saying is indeed true. Looking at the various treasures on Nan Tianyong's body, even with Yu's shrewdness, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He was an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. Just how deep was his foundation? To a mere expert at the middle stage of the Foundation establishment realm like Yu Jia, this was more than equivalent to 50 years of bitter cultivation. Even 100 years might not be enough. His heart was bursting with joy. After putting away the treasures in front of him, Yu Jia once again carried Nan Tianyong's corpse on his back, deliberately pretending to be in grief, and turned around to return to the soaring sky pavilion. Carrying Nan Tianyong's corpse back, he would first make the matter as big as possible, and then he would ask Nan Tianyong's 2 brothers to avenge him. At that time, he didn't have to worry about not alarming the 3 great pavilions and the law enforcement hall, and that Lin Air wouldn't be able to roam freely outside. Yu's plan could be said to be shrewd. However, even if he was beaten to death, he would never have thought that after he left with Nan Tianyong's corpse on his back, a familiar figure would walk out from the bushes. This figure was none other than Lin Yi, who had used all his strength to escape after throwing out the super true energy bomb. Hee, you even dare to kill your own master, and you still want to push the crime onto my head. The soaring sky pavilion has really raised a monster. Lin Yi laughed and shook his head. Even though he had killed his way up from the mortal world and made countless enemies, he had never seen such a sinister person. Chapter 3838. Lin Yi had already made up his mind to leave the scene as soon as possible. After all, he had suffered serious injuries from the super vital energy bomb, and the vital energy in his body had been exhausted because he had used too much vital energy jet before. No matter how he thought about it, it was better for Lin Yi to leave as soon as possible. After all, there was an old saying that of the 36 stratagems, it was best to leave. But there was also an old saying that it was dark under the light. The more dangerous the place was, the safer it was. It was a rare opportunity to deal with Nan Tianyong and Yu Jia. Lin Yi was not willing to let it go. Even if he was not in a good state, he could still observe the situation and wait for an opportunity. So Lin Yi turned back halfway and saw Yu Jia's every move from afar. He just followed from afar and did not show himself. "Huh, you want to frame me with this? Isn't this scheme a little too clever?" Lin Yi smiled coldly and shook his head. At this moment, he was holding a phone from the secular world, and this phone had recorded the entire scene of Yu Jia killing his master. It was difficult for high-tech products from the secular world to be brought to Heaven Island. Even if they could be brought up through the teleportation array, they would inevitably be destroyed by the pressure. Especially something as sophisticated as a phone. It was impossible to use normally. But Lin Yi had a cheat like the space in the jade pendant. It was difficult for other people to bring up high-tech products intact, but it was not a problem for Lin. Of course, things like a phone were almost useless to cultivators, especially in a place like Heaven Island. It was useless without a signal. Lin Yi did not intend to bring it up, but he had long been used to putting everything on him in the space in the jade pendant. This time he brought the phone up. It was purely a convenience. Not only the phone, but even the charger was stored in the space in the jade pendant. Back in the secular world, it was to keep in touch with the girls and his underlings at all times. He had specially asked someone to configure a solar power bank. Ever since he came to Heaven Island, although the mobile phone had lost its call function, it was still a habit of modern urbanites. There were photos of all the women stored in it. Lin Yi would often charge it and flip through it to take a look, even though he couldn't meet them for the time being, and many of them were still unconscious. But when he had nothing to do, he would look at these photos to remind himself of the person. It was also a form of motivation for him to improve his strength. Lin Yi didn't expect this habit to come in handy at a time like this. He was able to secretly record the scene of Yu Jia killing Nan Tianyong. Lin Yi was surprised by such a huge harvest. With such a video in their hands, it was equivalent to holding on to Yu Jia's fatal weakness. Even if this guy really made a big deal out of it, Yu Jia wouldn't be able to escape. In the future, in front of Lin Yi, he would not be able to cause any more trouble. If Lin Yi really wanted to deal with him, he wouldn't even need to make a move. All he had to do was show the video. Nan Tianyong's 2 brothers would definitely take the initiative to do it for him. The name of the 3 heroes of the Nan family had spread throughout the 3 pavilions. Nan Tianyong was ranked last, and his strength was also the weakest. However, he was already an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm. He was in charge of the important position of soaring pavilions, supervising deacon. As for his 2 brothers, it could be imagined that they were even more unfathomable. With the strength and status of these 2 people, if they really let them know that Yu Jia, their disciple, had personally killed Nan Tianyong, then even if Yu Jia fled to the ends of the earth, he wouldn't be able to escape from their pursuit. Although cultivators are powerful, ordinary people in the secular world aren't completely useless. High-tech things really can't be underestimated. Lin Yi smiled. When the time comes, this matter would really be exposed. Yu Jia, this guy, would never have thought that he would fall in the hands of ordinary people's high-tech. However, Lin Yi didn't intend to release this video so easily. Although he and Yu Jia wouldn't rest until one of them was dead, and if he released it like this, he would definitely be able to kill Yu Jia. However, this would also easily expose his own identity, and even the secret of the space in the jade pendant. After all, ordinary people would directly associate something like a cell phone with the secular world. And the people who had the deepest relationship with the secular world could only be Lin Yi and the other newcomers who had been teleported up from the secular world. It should be known that the last time a newcomer from the secular world was teleported up was already 1,000 years ago. At that time, there was no such thing as a cell phone at all. Looking at the entire northern island of the Heaven Stage Island, the only people who might have a cell phone on them were Lin Yi and the others. Lin Yi's identity would be easily exposed if someone came to investigate, and Yuja would be able to guess that he was Lin Air. Not only would the secret of the star Inkstone be exposed, but the fact that he'd brought the phone up undamaged would also cause people to investigate him. Lin Yi wouldn't be able to stop them even if he wanted to. Putting the cell phone back into the space in the jade pendant, Lin Yi smiled faintly, then turned around and returned to the welcome pavilion. Before waiting for a suitable opportunity, he would temporarily let Yuja jump around. The higher he jumped, the harder he would fall. Returning to the welcome pavilion, the only thing Lin Yi had to do next was to continue nurturing the two awakened heart-devouring exquisite grass seeds in the space in the jade pendant until they finally matured. Only then could they be used to refine the foundation-building pill. Once he successfully refined the foundation-building pill, for Lin Yi, it also meant that he was not far from the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. Apart from that, the newcomer challenge was in full swing. In the eyes of other newcomers, it was an important life event that determined their future. But for Lin Yi, it was almost completely a side event. Apart from the points that Cha Wu had given him at the beginning, no one dared to challenge him afterward. Looking at all the newcomers in the Blue Cloud Pavilion, the only one who could have an impact on him was Meng Tong. Although he had previously deduced that young Master Su and Meng Jueguang would not give up so easily, it was a fact that Meng Tong had not shown his strength for a long time. With Lin Yi's golden finger, as long as there was the slightest change in Meng Tong's strength, he would be able to detect it immediately. In reality, Meng Tong's strength did not change at all. Even after he recovered from his injuries, he did not challenge Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongkai again. Instead, he just followed behind them and took advantage of the situation. His cowardly behavior was completely different from Meng Tong's previous behavior. All the newcomers were discussing it, and the rumor had even developed into Lin Yi's group dominating the situation. Meng Jueguang, the big senior brother, was helpless. As for Meng Tong, naturally he could only admit defeat. Chapter 38-39. Lin Yi and the others, on the other hand, felt a strange pressure from this silence. The longer the opponent held back, the fiercer the backlash would be. However, the opponent did not move. Due to the ranking of the cave dwelling, Lin Yi and the others could not take the initiative to cause trouble for Meng Tong. They could only wait. That being said, no matter how fast Meng Tong improved with Lin Yi's strength, there was no need to take him seriously. While Lin Yi was wholeheartedly cultivating the heart-devouring exquisite grass, as expected, after she carried Nan Tianyong's corpse back, the entire Soaring Sky Pavilion was in an uproar. After all, Nan Tianyong was not an ordinary person. He was the supervising deacon of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Such a key person was killed in the territory of the three great pavilions. This was simply a provocation to the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was impossible not to cause a commotion. Before the upper echelons of the Soaring Sky Pavilion could react, Yuja had already found one of Nan Tianyong's two elder brothers, the second brother, Southern Sky Gate. According to Yuja's plan, he originally wanted to invite Nan Tianyong's two elder brothers, who were also his two martial uncles. Unfortunately, the eldest of the three Nan family heroes, Nan Tianba, was on a mission in the outer islands. Now, only the second brother, Southern Sky Gate, was left on the northern island of the Heaven Stage Island. However, even if it was only Southern Sky Gate, with his strength and position that was above Nan Tianyong's, it was more than enough for him to cause a commotion. One had to know that Southern Sky Gate's strength was even higher than Nan Tianyong's. However, to Yu's surprise, after seeing Nan Tianyong's corpse, Southern Sky Gate, the second brother of the same mother, did not have any expression of grief. Instead, he had a cold smile on his face. Humph. Third brother, this guy, is stupid and has a bad temper. Furthermore, his strength is so weak. When the eldest brother pushed this trash into the position of supervising deacon, I already knew that something bad would happen. As expected, Southern Sky Gate's face was filled with ruthless ridicule. There was not the slightest bit of brotherhood between them. Yu was instantly stunned. He was originally a little worried that the other party would investigate too much and find traces of his sword chi on Nan Tianyong's corpse. Although the sword chi wound on his chest was very similar to the other wounds caused by Jin Chi, if someone really compared it carefully, they would still be able to find something fishy. But now, Yu realized that he had been worrying in the wrong direction. With the South Heaven Gate's attitude, it was impossible for them to care about how their cheap master, Nan Tianyong, had died. Why did this useless third brother only die now? On the other hand, what Yuja needed to worry about the most was whether his second brother, the Southern Sky Gate, would stand up for his cheap master. If the Southern Heavenly Gate did not do anything about Nan Tianyong's death, then it would be difficult for Yuja to make use of this opportunity to blow the matter up. The Southern Heavenly Gate was Nan Tianyong's older brother. If even a close relative like him did not stand up and say anything, then even if the upper echelons of the Soaring Sky Pavilion were forced to intervene, they would not pay much attention to this matter. In this way, Yuja wanted to use Nan Tianyong's death to alarm the three great pavilions and the law enforcement hall. Thus, it would be a little unrealistic to force out Lin Yi's purpose in the end. Just when Yuja was racking his brains, not knowing how to persuade the other party to stand up for his cheap master, the Southern Heavenly Gate took the initiative to speak. However, although I don't like the useless third brother, no matter what, he is still a member of our Nan family's three heroes. If we let him be killed like this, the three heroes of the Nan family's face will be completely lost. Moreover, when Boss comes back in the future, I won't be able to explain it to him. The Southern Heavenly Gate shook his head impatiently. After pondering for a moment, the Southern Heavenly Gate reluctantly stood up from the armchair. Forget it. No matter what, we are brothers. I'll have to work a little harder and go with you. Marshal nephew, who did you say killed this piece of trash? Hearing this, Yuja was stunned, then hurriedly replied, It was a rogue cultivator called Lin Air. Rogue cultivator? The Southern Heavenly Gate glanced at Yuja and couldn't help but ask suspiciously, Although this third brother of mine is a bit of trash, he is still a member of our Nan family's three heroes, and his strength has barely reached the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. How could he be killed by a mere rogue cultivator? Looking at the 5 great islands of Heaven Stage, although there were many grassroots rogue cultivators, because of the lack of cultivation resources, they were generally the weakest at the bottom. There were very few experts, especially experts at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage, which could be counted on one's fingers. Nan Tianyong was actually killed by a mere rogue cultivator in the territory of the 3 great pavilions. The possibility of this happening was almost zero. To kill an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage and not even give him a chance to escape, this person's strength had to be at least at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. How could it be easy to find such an expert among the rogue cultivators? Yuja hurriedly nodded. Marshal uncle, I also feel that it is very unbelievable that Lin Air was able to kill Master. However, he is indeed a rogue cultivator who appeared out of nowhere, and on the surface, his strength is only at the peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. Puffed. Peak of the Foundation establishment early stage? When the Southern Heavenly Gate heard this, he directly spat out a mouthful of tea in Yuja's face. He glared at him with a pair of triangular eyes and said with ill intentions, "Are you King lying to me? Are you tired of living?" Normally, even if it was an expert of the same level, because of the natural disadvantage of cultivation resources, a grassroots, rogue cultivator would often not be a match for a sect cultivator like the three great pavilions. In other words, even if the opponent was an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Nan Tianyong, let alone a peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. Even if the opponent really had the strength to challenge someone of a higher level, he would at most be able to surpass one level. Although it was still very rare for a late-stage Foundation establishment late-stage expert to counterattack and kill a peak late-stage Foundation establishment late-stage expert, it was not completely unacceptable. If a mere rogue cultivator at the peak of the Foundation establishment early stage was able to kill a peak late-stage Foundation establishment late-stage expert like Nan Tianyong, no one would believe such nonsense, not even a ghost. It was normal for the Southern Heavenly Gate to have such a reaction. Yuja had already expected this, so he could only smile bitterly as he wiped the tea off his face and hurriedly explained, "Martial uncle, don't be agitated. I also don't believe that this Lin heir is only at the peak of the Foundation establishment early stage. It's just that this person might have hidden his strength, and with my eyesight, I can't see through his strength." Chapter 3840. The cultivation world never lacked methods to hide one's strength. Some are very simple and could be easily seen through with a little bit of attention. However, there were also some that could be hidden very well and could be said to be impeccable. If a high-level cultivator purposely hid his strength, it wouldn't be difficult for someone stronger than him to see through him. However, if someone weaker than him, it would be very difficult. According to the Southern Sky Gate's judgment, if the opponent was able to kill Nan Tianyong, then the opponent should at least have the strength of the late stage of the foundational level, or even higher. With Yuja's mid-stage foundational level strength, it was normal for him to not be able to see through the opponent's disguise. Sherbois is wise. However, in this disciple's opinion, that Brat's strength cannot compare to Master's. It was just that he exploded a great killing weapon and Master was caught off guard. That was why he killed her in one move. Otherwise, that guy would be far from being Master's match. Yuja analyzed with a sorrowful expression. He had no idea what Lin Yi's true strength was. However, from the first time they fought, even if Lin Yi was stronger than him, it wasn't by much. This time, the reason why his cheap master Nan Tianyong was tricked was because he underestimated his opponent. He didn't even use any martial skills and was directly thrown in the face by the killer weapon. That's why he died in one move. Of course, Nan Tianyong didn't need to die. However, with such a cruel and unscrupulous disciple like Yuja, it was hard for him to not die. Killer weapon. The Southern Sky Gate's expression changed slightly, and he said with interest, "Martial nephew, why don't you tell me in detail? What kind of killer weapon was it to be able to kill third brother in one move?" The martial world was dangerous, and the cultivation world was a place where the weak were prey to the strong. Any cultivator with a bit of strength would have their own trump card. However, some were useful, while others were not. Some were ordinary, while others were heaven-defying. Regardless, since it could be used as a trump card, then compared to normal martial skills, there must be something special about it. As for the Southern Sky Gate, he was always interested in other people's trump cards. It wasn't because he was very curious, but because the cultivation technique he cultivated was very special. It was called the lesser formless technique. In the cultivation world of Heaven Stage Island, there were 5 cultivation techniques that were widely known due to their powerful and heaven-defying effects. Moreover, they were highly respected, and almost all cultivators flocked to them. History had proven countless times that anyone who could obtain any one of them would have a high chance of ascending to the top in the future. These 5 techniques were collectively known as the 5 Great Divine Techniques. Among the 5 Great Divine Arts, there was a cultivation method called the non-phase divine art. According to legend, as long as one had this divine art, then using any martial skill would be a piece of cake. Even if he had never focused on cultivating, he would be able to imitate it with just a little experience, and its power would not be inferior to that of the original. This formless divine art, apart from being able to imitate anyone's martial technique, furthermore, it had an even more heaven-defying effect, which was that it could slowly merge the essence of the various martial skills that it had imitated. It became a brand new non-phase divine skill. In other words, this non-phase divine skill was a collection of the essence of 100 schools of thought. In theory, it was a super powerful martial skill that could continuously evolve and become stronger. This heaven-defying effect alone was enough to instantly defeat any martial skill. In the entire 5 Great Divine Islands, the number of cultivators who had the talent and the opportunity to cultivate the non-phase divine art could be counted on one hand. However, the minor non-phase divine art that the Southern Heaven Gate cultivated was not the original non-phase divine art. It was a simplified version that had been modified by an expert. Its effect was not as heaven-defying as the original non-phase divine art, but it still had the same effect, just that it was greatly weakened. The minor non-phase divine art could not fully replicate other martial skills. Even if it did, its power would be slightly weaker than the original version. Furthermore, unlike the original version, the minor non-phase divine art was not able to perfectly merge the essences of various martial skills and improve them infinitely. There were many limitations. That being said, the minor non-phase divine art was still an incredible art that far surpassed ordinary martial skills. There were not many people who had the opportunity to cultivate the minor non-phase divine art. The reason why the Southern Heaven Gate was able to acquire the minor non-phase divine art was not only because he was fortunate enough, but also because the 3 heroes of the Nan clan had a strong backer on the Middle Island. Chapter 3841. Next, not only did he want to steal the star inkstone from Linny, he also wanted to become Southern Sky Gate's disciple and obtain the minor phaseless technique. With these 2 things to rely on, he would have the chance to become the strongest Golden Core expert in the future. He, Yu Jia, was not willing to be an ordinary nobody. Think about it, he even dared to do something like killing his own master, something that angered even the gods. What could stop him in the future? That being said, the difficulty of obtaining the minor phaseless magic from the South Heaven Gate was even higher than retrieving the star inkstone from Lin Air, who had appeared out of nowhere. Unlike the simple-minded Nan Tianyong, the second brother of the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, Nan Tianmen was extremely shrewd. Furthermore, from his reaction towards Nan Tianyong's death, it was obvious that he was a cold-hearted person. In fact, he could even be described as ruthless. No matter how bad his relationship with Nan Tianyong was, they were still brothers from the same mother. However, not only did he not feel the slightest bit sad about Nan Tianyong's death, he even seemed to be taking pleasure in Nan Tianyong's misfortune. If it wasn't for the face of the Nan clan's 3 heroes, he wouldn't even have asked about it. With such a temperament, Yu Jia, who had killed his own master, could be said to be jackals of the same tribe. To numb such a troublesome person and obtain the minor phaseless technique from him was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. However, a technique like the minor phaseless technique was too rare. No matter how difficult it was, as long as there was a small chance, Yu Jia would not give up easily. This was similar to the star ink stone, a technique that could change one's fate. However, its effect might not be as heaven-defying as the star ink stone. Yu Jia knew that to obtain the minor phaseless technique, he had to first make Southern Sky Gate accept him as a disciple. If he wanted Southern Sky Gate to accept him as a disciple, then he had to curry favor with Southern Sky Gate and gain his recognition. Hearing Southern Sky Gate's question, Yu Jia was silent for a moment. Only then did he reply, reporting to Marshal Uncle, although I was present when Master was killed because I was quite far away, and because Lin Air's attack was extremely sinister and covert, I didn't see it too clearly. I only know that the move seemed to have condensed an unimaginable amount of qi, and the power of the explosion in an instant even caused the surrounding mountains to collapse, leaving behind a huge crater. The scene was extremely shocking. Really? The Southern Heavenly Gate couldn't help but be taken aback when he heard this. In recent years, the 3 great pavilions have sent a lot of people to set up layers of protective arrays in every territory, especially in a place like the market where all kinds of people are mixed together. In order to prevent cultivators from fighting and destroying the surroundings, they have specially arranged several layers of protective arrays. It is impossible for an ordinary person to destroy the surrounding mountains. Although the Foundation establishment stage could only be regarded as a beginner on the Heavenly Stage Island, it was still a heaven-defying cultivator who seized the fortune of heaven and earth. If they really had to use their full strength, they would not be able to do so. Even a random, early-stage Foundation establishment expert could easily destroy a mountain range. There were so many experts on Heaven Stage Island, and there were all kinds of conflicts happening all the time. If there were no corresponding protective measures, the island would be destroyed. The 5 Heaven Islands had already been smashed to pieces, so how could they have been passed down for millions of years? The reason why the 5 heaven-ranked islands were able to remain standing was due to the various sections. It was they who set up layers of protective arrays everywhere on Heaven Stage Island to offset the damage caused by the battle between cultivators, which allowed Heaven Stage Island to continue to exist until today. Take the protective arrays set up around the market by the 3 great pavilions as an example. Due to the gathering of people in the market, almost all the cultivators on the North Island were gathered here, not just the disciples of the 3 great pavilions. All kinds of conflicts were unavoidable every day. If it wasn't for special measures, this place would have been destroyed long ago. The protective arrays around the market had always been the tightest, and the defensive power had always been the strongest. Even a full blow from an early-stage Foundation establishment stage expert would not be able to leave any marks around it. What kind of power was needed to destroy all the mountains around the market with a single move? Even an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm might not be able to do this. That's true, and according to Disciple's observation, that Lin Air himself doesn't seem to be able to control such a powerful killer move. He can only throw it out, and he can't maximize the lethality at all. Yu Zhi pondered for a moment. Logically speaking, since the power of Lin Yi's killer move was so terrifying that it could overwhelm the protective arrays and destroy all the surrounding mountains, it should be easy to kill Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage Foundation establishment stage expert with such great power. However, although Nan Tianyong was caught off guard and was seriously injured, he did not die on the spot. If Yu Zhi hadn't killed him out of greed, Nan Tianyong would have been alive and kicking at this moment. Yu Zhi's speculation could be said to be reasonable, and it was indeed as he had speculated. Lin Yi couldn't completely control the true energy bomb, especially the super true energy bomb that he had been holding for an entire hour. Hearing Yu Zhi's words, the smile on Southern Sky Gate's face couldn't help but deepen. Interesting. Using a killer move that he can't even completely control, he was able to jump levels and kill number 3. I am more and more interested in this Lin Air you mentioned. Yu Zhi secretly smiled. It was good that he was interested. Otherwise, if this guy wasn't interested at all, how would he dig out this Lin Air for him? As expected, Southern Sky Gate immediately took the initiative to ask, "Since that Lin Air is a loose cultivator, then Marshal Nephew, do you know how to find him?" Grass root, loose cultivators were not like the disciples of the 3 great pavilions. They rarely had a unique cultivation cave and often didn't have a fixed place to live. Unless one was especially familiar with them, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to find them. Reporting to Marshal Uncle, Disciple has been looking for him these days. I've been thinking of various ways, but I still haven't been able to dig him out. The reason why I was able to meet him in the market was purely by accident. Yu Zhi replied respectfully, This is a bit troublesome. Southern Sky Gate couldn't help but frown. Even if the opponent had a killer move that could instantly kill Nan Tianyong, if he personally made a move, it wouldn't be a problem. However, how to find the opponent as soon as possible? This was the biggest problem. Chapter 3842. Even if it was only due to the pressure of public opinion, the higher-ups of the Soaring Pavilion would definitely take action. At that time, the experts of the law enforcement hall would inevitably be involved. Not to mention the fact that everyone knew about the 3 heroes of the Nan clan. Once Nan Tianyong died, the other 2 heroes would definitely seek revenge. With so many people watching him, unless there was something wrong with Lin Air's brain, there was no way he would continue to swagger around the market. If he didn't take the initiative to show himself, it would be easier said than done. Seeing this, Yu Zhi carefully suggested, Martial uncle, although this disciple doesn't know this Lin Second's exact background. According to what this disciple knows, he seems to be acquainted with the manager of the Hong merchant group in the inner street, Hongzhong. We should be able to find out some useful information from him. Oh, Martial nephew, are you sure? This loose cultivator actually knows the shopkeeper of the Hong Clan Merchant Association? That's not simple. Southern Sky Gate was slightly stunned. Unlike King Nanchinyong, who had been in seclusion for the past few years, Southern Sky Gate was very clear about the weight of the Hong Clan Merchant Association. It was truly a colossus. Even if he was only the shopkeeper of the North Island branch, he would still be an incredible figure. For a mere loose cultivator like Lin Air to be acquainted with the shopkeeper of the Hong Clan Merchant Association, in the eyes of a knowledgeable person like Southern Sky Gate, this news was even more shocking than him instantly killing Nan Tianyong. Yu Zhi nodded in confirmation. Although I don't know how close these 2 are, according to my speculation, Hongzhong seems to have given Lin Air a spirit jade card recently. This conjecture was purely the conclusion that Yu Zhi came up with after much thought. Even though it was a little groundless, this person's brain was good, and he really guessed the whole story. The basis of his speculation was the 3 times he and Lin met in the inner street. The first time, the 2 of them took advantage of the opening day of the inner street and saw the star inkstone at the Hong Clan Merchant Association. The second time, the 2 of them met again on the opening day of the inner street a month later. At the same time, they rushed to the Hong Clan Merchant Association to compete for the star inkstone. From this, it could be seen that Lin Yi definitely didn't have a spirit jade card on him, nor did he have the right to freely enter and exit the inner street. He would definitely buy the star inkstone before this happened. The third time, it was not the opening day of the inner street. Yu Zhi was able to enter the inner street completely because of the spirit jade card in the hands of his cheapskate master, Nan Tianyong. However, what surprised him the most was that he actually met Lin Yi for the 3rd time at the Hong Merchant Association. When the inner street was not open to the public, there were only 2 types of people who could freely enter and exit the inner street. One was the disciples of the 3 great pavilions whose status and strength were recognized by the market, and the other was the VIP who held the Spirit Jade card. Yu Zhi had been buried in the library for the past 3 years. However, he knew all the famous people in the 3 great pavilions like the back of his hand. At the very least, he had never seen Lin Air's face before. Otherwise, with his photographic memory, he would have recognized him the first time he saw him. Since it was not the first one, the only possibility left was the second one. This Lin Air didn't have a Spirit Jade card, but for some reason, after buying the Star Inkstone from the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce, he suddenly had one. So naturally, Yu Zhi had this conjecture. Hongzhong gave Lin Air a Spirit Jade card. Although this matter was a little unimaginable, he knew that Lin Air had something like the Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill in his hands. Businessmen always liked rare goods, so it was not difficult to understand why Hong Zhong gave Lin Er a spirit jade card because he thought highly of him. Spirit jade card? Interesting. Even someone at the level of number 3 doesn't have the right to receive a spirit jade card. If I remember correctly, this guy went to find Boss to borrow his spirit jade card a few days ago. Southern Sky Gate asked with a cold laugh. That's right, the spirit jade card can bring another person into the inner street. Without this spirit jade card, we wouldn't have met Lin Er this time. Yuja nodded. Humph. A piece of trash who can't even get a spirit jade card. If he lives, he will only bring shame to our Nan clan. Oh, right, Marshal Nephew. Did you find eldest brother's spirit jade card on his body? If Boss comes back and finds out that his spirit jade card is gone, he will go crazy. Southern Sky Gate frowned. On the 5 great islands of Heaven Stage, the spirit jade card was the best proof of a person's status. Even the strongest person would value it. Even the boss of the Nan clan's 3 heroes was no exception. Hearing this, Yuja's heart tightened. The spirit jade card that Nan Tianyong borrowed from Boss was now in his hands, along with the other treasures that were gathered from Nan Tianyong's body. Although he knew that without the owner's chi, even if he had the spirit jade card in his hands, he wouldn't be able to use a single bit of it. This was because to use the spirit jade card, one had to input chi and pass through the joint formation of the Merchant Guild. But Yuja couldn't resist the temptation. The owner of this spirit jade card was the boss of the Nan clan's 3 heroes. The number of spirit jades on it was enough to dazzle any cultivator. Yuja was no exception. It was rumored that as long as he could find the cooperation of a top merchant guild or someone from the Merchant Guild, even if it was someone else's spirit jade card, there was a way to extract all the spirit jades from it. Therefore, even though he knew that it was dangerous to keep this spirit jade card, Yuja still couldn't bear to throw it away. The spirit jades in this spirit jade card were enough to surpass the value of all the treasures he found on Nan Tianyong's body. This was something he could rely on in the future. How could he throw it away? Reporting to Marshal Uncle, Lin Er's killing move was too shocking. Many things on Master's body were lost. After that, it attracted a lot of onlookers from the nearby market. I couldn't care too much and could only steal Master's body. As for Marshal Uncle's spirit jade card, I don't know who picked it up in the chaos. Although Yuja was panicking, he didn't show it on his face and replied calmly. There were truths and lies in his words. Even a smart person like Southern Sky Gate wouldn't be able to determine the truth in such a short amount of time, unless he suspected Yuja from the beginning and directly searched his body or his cave. Unfortunately, although Southern Sky Gate didn't have a good relationship with Nan Tianyong, he still admired Nan Tianyong's disciple, Yuja. Chapter 3843. Now that Nan Tianyong had turned into a corpse, Yuja had lost his only support. With his intelligence, he definitely knew what to do in order to survive in the Soaring Sky Pavilion. What the Southern Sky Gate needed to do was simple. They needed to test if Yuja was loyal enough, then decide if they wanted to take him in. If that's the case, then Marshal Nephew, get someone to put up a notice in the market. As for whether or not we can get it back, we'll let the boss worry about it when he comes back. The Southern Sky Gate didn't care too much about it. After all, even if they tried their best to get it back, it wouldn't do them any good. They were just mentioning it out of convenience. Yes, Disciple understands. Yuja nodded immediately. The Southern Sky Gate's words were exactly what he wanted. Otherwise, if the other party really wanted to find the spiritual jade card, it would be a huge problem. The Southern Sky Gate paused for a moment, then said, "Then we'll take care of the spiritual jade card. As for Lin Er, since Marshal Nephew is sure that he is related to Hong Zhong, it seems like I'll have to pay a visit to the Hong Merchant Guild." Although the Southern Sky Gate didn't care about Nan Tianyong's humiliation at the Hong Merchant Guild, As one of the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, the news would naturally reach his ears through the mouths of the surrounding flatterers. The Southern Sky Gate's attitude towards this was completely disdainful. As for the 3rd brother, Nan Tianyong, he was even more of an idiot in his eyes. A mere peak late-stage foundation establishment cultivator dared to provoke the Hong Merchant Guild. If that was an idiot, then what was? Not to mention Nan Tianyong. Even the Southern Sky Gate, whose strength and status were above him, didn't dare to underestimate the enormous Hong Merchant Guild. Nan Tianyong used his strength and status to force the Hong Merchant Guild? What a joke! Saying that he was ignorant was already praising him. He really had a hole in his brain. The Southern Sky Gate was well aware of the enormous power of the Hong Merchant Guild and was extremely afraid of it. However, it wasn't to the point where they didn't dare to have any ideas, no matter what. He was also the 2nd brother of the Nan clan's 3 heroes. Now that the eldest brother wasn't here, if he didn't care about the death of the 3rd brother, Nan Tianyong, it would be extremely damaging to his reputation. Although the South Heaven Gate was 100 or even 1,000 times smarter than a simple-minded person like Nan Tianyong, he could not help but place great importance on his reputation. Even though he had no interest in the idiot Nan Tianyong hanging in the hands of others, he had no choice but to step forward for the sake of his reputation. What's more, she was different from him, who had a cold temperament. The eldest of the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, Nan Tianba, was very protective of his own people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lent something as precious as the Spirit Jade card to Nan Tianyong without any hesitation. Once Nan Tianba returned and found out that his younger brother was indifferent to the death of 3rd brother Nan Tianyong. The Southern Sky Gate could not imagine what kind of rage they would face at that time. A smart person like the Southern Sky Gate would never be so stupid as to threaten him like Nan Tianyong. The reason why he had the confidence to pay a visit to the Hong Merchant Guild was because there was a detail in Yu's words. Lin Er was not valued by the entire Hong Merchant Guild. He was merely valued by Hong Zhong, the manager of the North Island branch of the Hong Merchant Guild. Although it was only a few words different, the meaning behind it was completely different. If this Lin Er, he was an important customer valued by the entire Hong Merchant Guild, then even if the Southern Sky Gate had 10 times the guts, he would never dare to go to the Hong Merchant Guild and threaten them to hand over Lin Er's information. As the 2nd most famous merchant guild on the 5 islands of Heaven rank, the Hong Merchant Guild was extremely protective of their customers. Especially the important customers that they valued, they were always extremely protective of them. If Lin Er was this kind of customer, then forget about the Southern Sky Gate. Even if the 3 great pavilions of the North Island came forward to pressure the Hong Merchant Guild, it would be useless. Although businessmen pursued profits and would often resort to unscrupulous means, the main reason why the Hong Merchant Guild was able to become the colossus it was today was because of its reputation. Without a strong reputation, it would be impossible to become a top chamber of commerce. To build such a degree of reputation, it would require years of operation. This process was very long and difficult, but it was very easy to destroy such a strong reputation. As long as they sold information about a customer, even if it was just the simplest identity, once it was spread out, it would be enough to destroy the strong reputation that had been accumulated for thousands of years. Everyone who joined the Hong Merchant Guild, even the lowest manservant, had to go through all kinds of brainwashing every day. The most basic and most important rule was to protect the Hong Merchant Guild's reputation with their lives. However, if Lin Er was only valued by Hong Zhong, then it would be much easier to deal with. Where there were people, there would be conflicts. Even within the Hong Merchant Guild, it was not a monolithic block. If the higher-ups of the Hong Merchant Guild's Middle Island headquarters spoke, then Hong Zhong's position as the representative of the Hong Merchant Guild on the North Island would naturally be gone. The Southern Sky Gate knew very well that if they wanted to pry out Lin Er's identity from Hong Zhong, the first step was to separate Hong Zhong from the Hong Merchant Guild. The Southern Sky Gate did not dare to challenge the Hong Merchant Guild, but if it was only Hongzhong, then there was still a chance to threaten them. May I ask, Martial Uncle, when are we going to the Hong Merchant Guild? Although Yuzha did not know what the Southern Sky Gate was planning, he still dared to say something like going to the Hong Merchant Guild even after knowing that Nan Tianyong had suffered a setback. It was obvious that he had something to rely on and his confidence. There's no rush. Let's talk about it in 2 days. Martial nephew, you should first send out the notice to search for Boss's spiritual jade card. I need to prepare something and, at the same time, observe the situation. The Southern Sky Gate's expression was unfathomable. He then waved his hand at Yuzha, indicating that he could leave. Yes, Martial Uncle. Yuzha did not say anything else and respectfully kowtowed. He faced the Southern Sky Gate and carefully retreated to the door, then turned around and left. Looking at Yuzha's back as he left, the Southern Sky Gate thoughtfully rubbed his chin and said to himself with a chuckle, "This kid sure pretends to be obedient, but if he wants to win my favor, he's still far from it." 3 days passed by in the blink of an eye. The supervising deacon Nan Tianyong was killed in an instant near the market. After 3 days of brewing, this matter had become known to everyone, not only the disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, but even the disciples of the other 3 pavilions were discussing this matter during their leisure time. Chapter 3844. The market was a place where good and bad mixed together. Not only were there a large number of disciples from the 3 pavilions, but there were also a large number of rogue cultivators. If the murderer was a disciple from the 3 pavilions, then it would not be difficult to find the real culprit after a little investigation. However, if it was a rogue cultivator, then it would be very difficult to find the culprit. But what was surprising was that Nan Tianyong, a key figure in a key position, was killed in the territory of the 3 great pavilions. Everyone was just discussing it out of boredom, and it didn't cause any strong cries. No one deliberately created public opinion to pressure the higher-ups of the 3 great pavilions to find the real culprit as soon as possible. Nan Tianyong, the supervisor of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, had a poor relationship with others. Because of the widespread attention, the higher-ups of the Soaring Sky Pavilion had already come forward to investigate this matter. The nature of this matter could not be said to be bad. If they did not even care about Nan Tianyong, a person with a high status, being killed in his own territory, then where would the prestige of the Soaring Sky Pavilion be? How would they be able to convince the public in the future? However, although the law enforcement hall had registered this matter, they did not make any targeted big movements. It was rather cold for a period of time. After everyone had forgotten about it, they would put it on the shelf. In the world of cultivation that was filled with fighting and killing, the death of a person was a common occurrence. Unless it was a massacre like the one in the Hiawatha Manor where thousands of people died, it would affect the interests of certain people. Only then would a large number of people be involved. This time, if Nan Tianyong's identity as the supervisor of the Soaring Sky Pavilion was not a little sensitive, the higher-ups would not pay attention to him at all. If he died, then he died. There was nothing to be surprised about. However, under the premise that there was no special greeting from the higher-ups, the law enforcement hall was just going through the motions. In the words of the current law enforcement hall master, Ramjia, the law enforcement hall was not bored enough to seek justice for the weak. Only the big figures of the big forces. That was the real target they needed to keep an eye on. In the eyes of most ordinary cultivators, Nan Tianyong was already a high and mighty figure. However, in the eyes of Ramjia, he was no different from ordinary people at the bottom. He was just a lowly ant, and there was no need to waste energy on him. Sure enough, if I want to give Boss a satisfactory explanation, I'll have to do it myself. The South Heaven Gate had expected this to happen. After being in the Soaring Sky Pavilion for so long, it was impossible for them to not know what the authorities and the disciplinary hall were like. Then, he would have wasted his time. However, he did not wait in vain for the past 3 days. After all, apart from observing the situation, he had to prepare a trump card if he wanted to personally make a trip to the Hong Chamber of Commerce. And now he had been waiting for this trump card. After calling Yu Jie, the Southern Heavenly Gate immediately headed to the market square. However, he was different from Nan Tianyong. He had his own Spirit Jade card, so bringing Yu Jie in was not a problem. Arriving in front of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the Southern Heavenly Gate didn't say a word. With a cold expression, he strode in, while Yu Jie followed closely behind. The manservant at the entrance of the Hong Chamber of Commerce immediately sensed that something was wrong. Then he glanced at Yu Jie. He immediately understood. Although he didn't know who the Southern Sky Gate was, Yu Jie had been coming to the Hong Chamber of Commerce quite a few times recently. Moreover, the recent disturbances were all because of him. If the manservant still couldn't recognize him, then it would be a waste of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's painstaking training. "Where's your shopkeeper?" The Southern Heavenly Gate did not even look at the manservant. He curled his lips and said condescendingly, "The 3 heroes of the Nan family were used to being arrogant. Even as smart as he was no exception. He had never been nice to his subordinates. Furthermore, even if it was for the purpose of coming here today, he had to be arrogant. Disregarding everything else, he had to first suppress the other party with his aura. Otherwise, with the cunning nature of these merchants, there was no way he could pry the truth out of their mouths." To be honest, after seeing the Southern Heavenly Gate's behavior, Yu Jie, who was following behind him, was somewhat panicking. Not only did his cheap master, Nan Tianyong, suffer from the terror of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guest chamberlains, even he himself had personally experienced it. Although it was only for a short moment, it was enough to make him tremble in fear. Although the Southern Heavenly Gate was very strong, even stronger than Nan Tianyong, who was at the peak of the late stage of the foundation establishment realm, Yu Jie did not think that he would be able to gain any advantage over the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guest chamberlains. Even if he was not inferior to the other party in a one-on-one fight, it was not like the other party only had 1 guest chamberlain. Although he was on tenterhooks, Yu Jie knew that he had no right to criticize the Southern Heavenly Gate. Furthermore, the Southern Heavenly Gate was not a simple person. If he did not have someone to rely on, he would not do something so stupid. After a while, the 2 of them were invited to a private room on the 2nd floor by the manservant. This time, to Yu Jie's surprise, the shopkeeper Hong Zhong, who was always polite to everyone, did not stand up to welcome them. "May I know what the 2 of you have come for?" Hong Zhong sat on a wooden armchair and drank a cup of high-quality tea while looking at the 2 of them. He said calmly, "The Hong Chamber of Commerce sincerely welcomes any guest. However, if you are here to cause trouble, then forgive me for not seeing you off. Don't ask for trouble." As a businessman, Hong Zhong had always welcomed guests from all over the world with a smile. However, he had never been kind to guests who had obviously come with ill intentions. As one of the top Chamber of Commerce on the 5 Great Islands, if the Hong Chamber of Commerce was too arrogant, people would say that they were bullying their customers. However, Hong Zhong knew that he had to be tough sometimes. He even had to make a show of his power every once in a while. Otherwise, if he only knew how to be patient, it would make people think that he was weak and easy to bully. They would then climb all over him and cause him endless trouble. It might even affect the impression other customers had of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, which would make business difficult. In Hong Zhong's eyes, since the 2 people in front of him had obviously come with ill intentions, there was no need for him to be polite. It was already very polite of him to send them off with tea. If the 2 of them were still so stubborn, he would have no choice but to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. Ask for trouble. The Southern Heavenly Gate glanced at Hong Zhong. A mere slave of a merchant dared to be so rude to him. He could not help but feel angry. He immediately laughed coldly and said, "The Hong Chamber of Commerce is quite famous. However, I'm very curious. Is this how you usually treat your guests? Chapter 38:45. Of course, the reason why the executive of the Hong Chamber of Commerce gave him the spiritual jade card was mostly because of the big shot of the Nan clan. However, Southern Sky Gate rarely visited the Hong Chamber of Commerce on the North Island. Instead, he was roped in by another big merchant with a lot of money. After all, with his position in the soaring pavilion, as long as he was roped in, he could reap huge benefits. There are good and bad guests. If you're a good guest, the Hong Chamber of Commerce will naturally treat you with respect. If you're a bad guest, then there's nothing much to say. In the world of cultivation, the strong are respected. I'm sure you're aware of this, Hong Zhong said calmly. The strong are respected? Southern Sky Gate's eyes flickered. He was surprised to find out that he couldn't see through Hong Zhong's strength. He couldn't rule out the possibility that Hong Zhong was using some kind of secret skill to hide his strength. However, logically speaking, if he couldn't see through Hong Zhong's strength, it meant that Hong Zhong's strength was higher than his. No wonder he was the manager of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's North Island branch. He couldn't be underestimated. Southern Sky Gate's heart trembled, but he didn't plan to give up. After all, he came to the Hong Chamber of Commerce today with ample preparation. Humph. It seems that in your eyes I'm a bad guest. However, do you know who I am? Southern Sky Gate snorted and said disdainfully. Compared to the third brother, Nan Tianyong, Southern Sky Gate was not only stronger, but his position in the soaring pavilion was also much higher. Nan Tianyong's position as the supervising deacon would at most cause people to feel respectful toward him. However, his position in the South Heaven Gate was definitely a hot topic. Not only would people feel respectful toward him, he would also have access to a huge amount of cultivation resources. If anyone was able to befriend him, it would bring them great benefits. Almost half of the merchants in the inner street of the market took the initiative to befriend him. It could even be said that they were trying to curry favor with Southern Sky Gate. There were many people who wanted to rope him in with a lot of money. However, none of these merchants was the flagship business giant of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, Southern Sky Gate had long harbored a grudge against the Hong Chamber of Commerce, or strictly speaking, the Hong Chamber of Commerce's North Island branch. Therefore, the South Heaven Gate had purposely paid a visit this time. On the surface, it seemed like it was for Nan Tianyong's sake, but in reality, it was possible that they were trying to use the opportunity to teach the South Heaven Gate a lesson. The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that Hong Zhong dared to be so rude to him because he didn't know his identity. Otherwise, any merchant who knew his identity would treat him like the god of wealth. Why would they put on such a cold face? Unexpectedly, Hong Zhong didn't even raise his head as he said, ranked second among the 3 heroes of the Nan clan, Soaring Pavilion's eldest senior brother, Southern Heavenly Gate. How did you know? The South Heaven Gate's expression changed instantly. If the other party did not know his identity, it would be understandable for him to show such a cold face. But on the premise that he knew his identity as the first senior brother steward of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he still dared to treat him like this. This was completely unexpected. Soaring Sky Pavilion's eldest senior brother in charge of the new Blue Cloud Pavilion didn't sound much different from Meng Jueguang, who was the eldest senior brother in charge of the new disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. However, the difference in status between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. As the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Meng Jueguang could only manage a dozen or so new disciples of the Blue Cloud Pavilion. Most of them hadn't even reached the foundation establishment stage. However, as the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, apart from the Golden Core stage, Southern Heavenly Gate was in charge of all the inner disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. He had a lot of power and was in charge of a lot of cultivation resources. It was enough to make countless people envious. The status and power of the two could not be compared at all. Even Hu Yunfeng, the pavilion master of the welcoming pavilion, a person with real power in charge of a department, did not dare to be careless in front of the southern heavenly gate, not to mention a mere Meng Jueguang. Of course, not all the department masters would pay any attention to the eldest senior brother in charge of the soaring sky pavilion, southern heavenly gate. The reason why Hu Yunfeng acted this way was because the welcoming pavilion was ranked last among all the departments. If it was the hall master of a top-notch department like the law enforcement hall, a powerful person like Ram Jia would not even look at the southern heavenly gate in the eye. Even so, in the eyes of the shopkeepers in the market, the eldest senior brother in charge of the soaring sky pavilion, southern heavenly gate, was still a hot commodity. He was a god of wealth worth spending a lot of money to win over. No matter which shop he walked into, he would be treated with the utmost respect. Even his own father would not be able to receive such treatment. As long as he bribed the southern heavenly gate, he would take care of his shop's business when he purchased resources for the disciples of the soaring sky pavilion in the future. The profit would be an astronomical figure, enough to make any businessman go crazy with envy. As the shopkeeper of the North Island branch of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Hong Zhong had never paid any attention to the southern heavenly gate. Now that he had taken the initiative to come to the southern heavenly gate, he still dared to treat him so coldly despite knowing the southern heavenly gate's identity. With such a huge gap, it was no wonder that the southern heavenly gate lost his composure. The fact that Hong Zhong could become the shopkeeper of the branch meant that he was a businessman through and through. How could a businessman treat the god of wealth like this? Looking at the southern heavenly gate's shocked expression, Hong Zhong said with a faint smile, "Although the Hong Chamber of Commerce is not an intelligence organization, it's basic to be observant when doing business on the North Island. No matter what, you are the eldest senior brother in charge of the soaring sky pavilion. Is it strange that I recognized you?" Being recognized by a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, like Hong Zhong, was supposed to be proof of one's identity. However, when the southern heavenly gate heard this, his face instantly turned gloomy. "You know my identity, but you never paid any attention to me. Now that you've come to visit me, not only did you not offer me up, you even treated me so coldly. Isn't this a slap in the face?" The southern heavenly gate thought that with his identity, he could at least intimidate the other party a little. However, he did not expect to be slapped in the face by the other party in such a calm manner. The southern heavenly gate felt his face burning with embarrassment. The southern heavenly gate forced his expression and sneered, "Humph, you know my identity, but you still dare to treat me so coldly." It seems that shopkeeper Hong is very confident in himself. I wonder if the higher-ups of the Middle Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce will have any opinion on this. Although the Hong Chamber of Commerce was one of the few top chambers of commerce on the 5 heavenly islands, and Hong Zhong, as the shopkeeper of the branch, had enormous power on the North Island, if the higher-ups of the Middle Island knew that he had acted on impulse and harmed the Hong Chamber of Commerce's interests, his position as the branch shopkeeper would probably come to an end. Chapter 3846. In the eyes of any merchant befriending Southern Sky Gate, a person with real power in the soaring pavilion would bring them great benefits. Even Hong Zhong had the same idea in the beginning, but after secretly observing Southern Sky Gate's character, he immediately gave up on the idea. This article was written by. First, the reason was simple. Southern Sky Gate was a greedy person, and it could even be said that he was greedy beyond measure. Perhaps after befriending him, they could earn a huge profit of tens of thousands of spiritual jades through his power, but the price would be at least 60% or even more. Although the merchant could still earn 40% of the profit, Hong Zhong, as a shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, had always looked at the person when choosing a partner, not the profit in front of him. Only by choosing the right partner could there be long-term benefits. Otherwise, even if they got a little profit in front of them temporarily, they would definitely have to pay it back tenfold or even 100-fold in the future. This was Hong Zhong's experience after being in charge of the North Island branch of the Hong Chamber of Commerce for decades. Therefore, even though Hong Zhong knew that Southern Sky Gate was very popular and was highly sought after by other shopkeepers, Hong Zhong had never thought of befriending him. Instead, he kept a respectful distance and ignored him. Seeing that Hong Zhong was so fearless, the Southern Sky Gate was stunned. Logically speaking, a shopkeeper like Hong Zhong who was sent out was most afraid of the higher-ups of Middle Island, because those people controlled their future and could decide their future development with a single word. However, Hong Zhong in front of him seemed to be very confident and fearless. Or did this guy not believe that he could talk to the higher-ups of Middle Island? Southern Sky Gate quickly came to a conclusion. The reason why Hong Zhong was so fearless was most likely the latter. After all, in the eyes of normal people, although he, the Southern Sky Gate, was the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, and was considered to have a high position in the eyes of most people, he was not qualified to talk to the higher-ups of Middle Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Hong Zhong did not take his threat seriously. That was human nature. You don't believe that I have the ability? It doesn't matter. You'll be kneeling down and begging me later. The South Heaven Gate shook his head with a mocking expression and went straight to the point. I've come personally to ask about someone's background. Shopkeeper Hong, I heard that you're quite close to the rogue cultivator, Lin Air, who killed my third brother. The Southern Heavenly Gate thought that after it said this, the other party would definitely retort fiercely, saying something stupid like protecting customer information was the lifeline of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. But unexpectedly, Hong Zhong's reaction was completely different from what he had expected. Hong Zhong didn't overreact or even say a word. He just picked up the teacup. That was all. The meaning of serving tea to send off the guest could not be more obvious. Regarding this question, Hong Zhong, who had always been amiable, did not even have the interest to say a word. He directly served tea to send the guest off. Even the South Heaven Gate's face flushed red with anger. He didn't even say a word. This kind of silent response was even more infuriating than malicious words of ridicule and ridicule. Shopkeeper Hong, I'll call you Shopkeeper Hong for the last time. I advise you to be sensible and cooperate with me. Otherwise, don't blame me for not giving you a chance if you don't want face. The South Heaven Gate forcefully suppressed his anger and said, although he had everything he could rely on for this trip. But if it wasn't necessary, he didn't want to completely fall out with Hong Zhong. After all, the Hong Chamber of Commerce was one of the few top chambers of commerce. If he could make the other party cooperate with him obediently, not only would he be able to obtain more benefits, it would also be more flawless. Therefore, the purpose of his trip today was to use Nan Tianyong's death as an opportunity to demonstrate his power to Hong Zhong. He didn't really want to cause trouble, nor did he want to completely fall out with the other party. I'm giving you face, but you don't want it? Hong Zhong glanced at him in surprise, and then said with a smile that was not a smile, this old man should be the one saying that. You are an uninvited guest, and this old man has already served tea to send you off. But you still have the cheek to stay here and refuse to leave. Who is the one who is being so shameless? After a pause, Hong Zhong said in a serious tone, since you are so thick-skinned, then I'll be frank. I can't help you with your request. Take care I won't send you off. Old fart, I'm only showing you some respect, because you're the manager of the Hong Merchant Group. But since you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, then don't blame me for being rude. As the South Heaven Gate spoke, his aura suddenly rose to its peak. As if a storm was approaching, the surrounding tables and chairs began to tremble. The foundation completion stage? His strength is stronger than Nan Tianyong's, but he dares to cause trouble here with such little strength. Aren't you looking down on the Hong Chamber of Commerce? Hong Zhong said with a serious expression. Without Hong Zhong's command, the moment the South Heaven Gate unleashed his aura, there were already 4 powerful auras that were not any weaker than his. Some of them were even stronger than his, and had already locked onto him from a distance. If the South Heaven Gate continued to act like this, there was no doubt that he would repeat the same mistake as Nan Tianyong. Even if he was stronger than Nan Tianyong, his ending would definitely not be any better. If he, the eldest senior brother in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, were to be thrown out of the window like his younger brother, Nan Tianyong, then he would lose all his face. Even if he were to sit in this powerful position, it would be difficult for him to convince the others. He might even become a laughing stock. If a fight were to break out, the South Heaven Gate knew that he did not have the strength to defend against so many guest officials of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Therefore, seeing that the situation was not good, he had no choice but to use the trump card that he had carefully prepared for the past 3 days. Wait, if you want to fight against me, I advise you to read this letter first. The South Heaven Gate suddenly took out a letter from his pocket and threw it on the ground in front of him. Although the 4 guest officials did not show themselves, it was not difficult for them to read the contents of the letter with their strength. After the South Heaven Gate threw the letter, the 4 powerful auras dissipated at the same time, as if they had never appeared in the first place. As for Hong Zhong, after reading the contents of the letter, his expression turned gloomy for the first time. The letter was about Lin Air's identity. According to the letter, the South Heaven Gate was an important client recognized by the entire Hong Chamber of Commerce, while Lin Air was only a personal client of Hong Zhong. It was obvious which was more important. Chapter 3847. If it was just a letter from an ordinary person in the headquarters, Hong Zhong would frown at most. He was a shopkeeper, and he had full authority to manage all the affairs of the Hong Chamber of Commerce in the North Island. Even the higher-ups of Middle Island couldn't tell him what to do. But the problem was that the person who signed the letter had the vital identity of the Hong Shadow Group's 4 Directions supervisor of the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce. His authority was sufficient to supervise the various branches of the Hong Clan Chamber of Commerce, from the shopkeeper to the manservant. Once he was accused of malfeasance and investigated, then no matter how clean and honest Hong Zhong was, a layer of his skin would surely be peeled off, and he might even be stripped of his position as the branch's manager. His hard work of a few tens of years would be destroyed in a single day. Looking at Hong Zhong's gloomy face, Southern Sky Gate couldn't help but feel relieved. He even showed a long-lost complacency on his face. Since becoming the first senior brother in charge of the Soaring Pavilion, the South Heaven Gate had always maintained a poker face, especially not showing any superficial expression that would cause others to look down on him. However, at this moment, he could not help but feel proud of himself. From the moment he entered the room, he had been on the losing end. But now that he had revealed his trump card, the situation immediately turned around. Not only was Hong Zhong, the arrogant old man, shocked, even the 4 elusive foreign chamberlains were scared silent at this moment. Hong Ying's 4 Directions supervisor was a ruthless character that everyone in the Hong Chamber of Commerce feared. Not only was Hong Zhong, who was a normal branch manager, afraid of him, but even guest experts who had a high degree of freedom had to give way in front of him. The treatment of the Hong Chamber of Commerce's guardian foreign chamberlains was second to none in the industry. Even if the 4 Directions supervising inspector did not have the authority to supervise the guardian foreign chamberlains in name, if they were to be recorded by him and reported to the higher-ups, it would be hard to say if they could continue to be guardian foreign chamberlains in the future. The 4 guest experts who guarded the North Island branch were usually aloof and looked down on everyone in the North Island. Usually, they could be aloof and look down on anyone in the North Island. However, when it came to their personal interests, they had to keep silent. No matter what level of strength they were at, cultivators were always the most realistic group of people. How about it, old fart? Can you tell me the details of that bullshit, Lin Air, now? I don't have the patience to waste my time with you. Under the astonishment of the surrounding crowd, the Southern Heavenly Gate sat down on an armchair in the middle of the room as if there was no one else around and leisurely crossed his legs. Everything was under his control. The Southern Heavenly Gate looked at the empty teapot at the side and snorted coldly at the servant at the door. Why aren't you serving me tea? You don't even have the slightest bit of eyesight. Why would the Hong Chamber of Commerce raise a bunch of trash like you? If it was before, the Southern Heavenly Gate would have been chased out by the 4 guest chamberlains, but now no one dared to make a sound. Even Hong Zhong, the shopkeeper and the representative of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce in the North Island, just glanced at him, but he didn't say anything. The servant at the door shrunk his neck when he saw this. He had no choice but to sneak in and take the teapot away to prepare tea for the Southern Heavenly Gate. By the side, Yuja could not help being secretly shocked when he saw the scene. The Hong's Chamber of Commerce was an unfathomable place. Now, with just a thin piece of paper, he managed to make the shopkeeper, Hong Zhong, and the 4 guest chamberlains speechless. Then he turned the tables around and laughed. This Uncle Master of the Southern Heavenly Gate. As expected, he was a troublesome person that his cheap master could not compare to. However, at this moment, Yuja could not help but feel secretly pleased when he saw Hong Zhong, the shopkeeper who did not even bother to hide his feelings, being defeated. Although the one who really stole the star inkstone was Lin Air, Hong Zhong, who awarded the star inkstone to Lin Air, was also on Yuja's list of people to hate. However, because he was too weak, he could not find trouble with Hong Zhong even if he hated him. Now, Yuja did not have to do it himself. The Uncle Master of the Southern Heavenly Gate had already done it for him. Looking at Hong Zhong, the so-called big shot of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce, being defeated, and the pitiful expression of him gritting his teeth in hatred but not daring to resist, this feeling was simply too great. There were pros and cons to everything. The identity of the shopkeeper of the North Island branch of the Hong's Chamber of Commerce brought Hong Zhong's status and power, but it also placed layers of restrictions on him. With this letter in front of him, if Hong Zhong said no, it would be equivalent to going against Hong Ying's 4 Directions supervising inspector. Although the supervising inspector of the 4 Directions didn't have the power to promote others, if they wanted to ruin someone's future, they could do it with just a word. Therefore, even a powerful shopkeeper like Hong Zhong didn't dare to underestimate them in the slightest. After all, this matter was related to one's future, so who would dare to take it lightly? After a while, the servant brought the tea to the door and carefully looked at the gloomy Hong Zhong. Seeing that Hong Zhong did not say anything, he could only bite the bullet and place the tea on the table beside the Southern Heavenly Gate. Then he bowed and left. The Southern Heavenly Gate poured himself a cup and took a sip in satisfaction. He then smirked at Hong Zhong and said, "You should have thought about what you should do. When you're under someone else's roof, you have no choice but to lower your head. You're already an old man. I don't think you need me to teach you that." The South Heaven Gate never doubted if Hong Zhong would cooperate with them. With the letter from the 4 supervising envoys of the Hong Ying group, it was equivalent to holding an imperial sword. The South Heaven Gate was not worried that Hong Zhong would not cooperate. Hong Zhong was a sensible man. If he did not have the tolerance to adapt to the situation, he would not have been able to become the shopkeeper of the North Island branch. Previously, according to the Southern Heavenly Gate's original plan, unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not plan to use this letter to force Hong Zhong to submit. He originally thought that after Hong Zhong realized his power, he would take the initiative to cooperate with him in a big business deal. Although using someone's power to establish his authority would allow the other party to have a better understanding of his power, making it easier for him to gain a stronger position in the future, if he used his power to bully others too much, it might have the opposite effect. If Hong Zhong held a grudge and refused to cooperate with him, it would be as bad as going too far. However, Hong Zhong, this old man, did not take the face he was given, and insisted on stepping on his face. There was nothing he could do to stop him, so he had no choice but to satisfy him. The southern heavenly gate was not as impatient as he claimed to be. He did not seem to have any intention of rushing Hong Zhong. Judging from his expression, he seemed to be enjoying the feeling. Chapter 3848. Seeing the South Heaven Gate's fearless expression after taking out the letter, Hong Zhong fell silent for a moment before he burst out laughing. "It seems like you're certain that I'm going to be the one in the bag." "Oh, isn't that so? Do you still dare to say no to me?" Southern Heavenly Gate sneered, not taking Hong Zhong's question seriously at all. Hong In Group's 4 directions inspectors were very important in the Hong Chamber of Commerce. He knew it clearly when he was in contact with the higher-ups of Middle Island. He easily defeated a branch manager, and not only was the other party unable to resist, he even had to kneel down and beg for mercy in order to save his life. With this letter guarding this place, even if Hong Zhong was given a few more guts, he would not dare to say half a word of no. Half a word? Hong Zhong raised an eyebrow and shook his head. "Then I'll have to disappoint you. I've never said more than half a word. However, I can tell you very clearly that you can leave now." In an instant, the atmosphere in the Hong Chamber of Commerce suddenly froze. Southern Heavenly Gate, who was confident that everything was under his control, had a subtle and even unbelievable expression on his face. "You don't understand what I said?" Hong Zhong looked at Southern Heavenly Gate's expression. His eyes filled with mockery and coldness. "Then I might as well make it more straightforward and easier to understand. You can leave." "Huh. You old man, are you suffering from dementia?" Southern Heavenly Gate's face instantly turned red, and he couldn't help but say angrily, "Did you read what was written in the letter? How dare you ignore the words of the 4 directions inspectors of the Hong In Group and pretend not to see them?" Southern Heavenly Gate thought that after he deliberately mentioned the words that carried great weight in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, even if the other party wasn't as afraid as he imagined, he wouldn't be able to ignore them. However, after hearing his words, Hong Zhong still looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. He said calmly, "Of course I saw what he said, but so what? As the manager of the North Island branch, I have full authority to decide everything in the North Island of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Do you think that a mere 4 directions inspector can control me?" F***CK. The Southern Sky Gate stared in bewilderment. Even though he was usually experienced and prudent, he couldn't help but curse at that moment. Even the other people in the Hong Chamber of Commerce, as well as the 4 elusive guest chamberlains, were shocked. One could clearly feel that their aura paused for a moment. They were obviously stunned. There was no problem with Hong Zhong's logic at all. The so-called 4 supervisors of the Hong In Group only had the power to supervise the 4 directions branch and had no direct leadership power. Therefore, in theory, if Hong Zhong, the manager of the North Island branch, wanted to do something, the 4 supervisors really couldn't do anything. However, even if the other party couldn't control him, he was still in existence that could stifle his future. Hong Zhong wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Even the manservant at the bottom of the Hong Chamber of Commerce could see the stakes clearly. Hong Zhong, the veteran shopkeeper who had been guarding the North Island branch for decades, was not a match for Hong Zhong. How could he not see it? However, he still did so. This was really incomprehensible. Could it be that shopkeeper Hong didn't even have this little bit of slyness? Just because of Lin Air, he let his emotions affect his decisions to the point of going against a 4 directions supervisor? Isn't this a little too illogical? "Sir, you're still lingering here. Looks like you're going to take the hard way instead of the soft way." Hong Zhong's expression remained the same. He picked up his teacup again and smiled. "For guests, can you please send these 2 evil guests off for me?" After hearing that, The southern sky gate and Yu's expressions instantly changed. After coming back to their senses, the southern sky gate hurriedly threatened. This old man has gone crazy. I'd like to see who else will go crazy with him. From the southern sky gate's point of view, even if Hong Zhong had gone crazy and ignored the 4 directions supervisor's threat, the other people, including the 4 guest chamberlains, wouldn't go crazy with him. Don't forget, when it came to personal interests, cultivators were always the most realistic group of people. Unexpectedly, after a brief pause, the 4 powerful auras once again loomed over his head without hesitation. It was obvious that between Hong Zhong and the southern sky gate, the 4 guest chamberlains had already made their choice. The 4 guest chamberlains appeared at the same time, not giving the southern sky gate any chance to resist. They immediately surrounded him and Yu Zhe, and used the same method they used against Nan Tianyong last time, tossing them out of the window on the 2nd floor. As it wasn't the opening day of the inner street, there weren't many people on the street. However, when 2 living people were suddenly tossed out of the window, and one of them was an important figure like the southern sky gate, the inner street instantly burst into an uproar. Being pointed at by the crowd with mocking gazes, not only was the authority of the South Heaven Gate embarrassed, even a nobody like Yu Zhe felt ashamed, and was too ashamed to face the others. This time, the 2 of them finally experienced what Nan Tianyong had felt. The only difference was that Nan Tianyong was alone, while the 2 of them had teamed up to embarrass themselves. Damned old man. The southern sky gate looked at the calm Hong Zhong at the window on the 2nd floor and couldn't help but grit his teeth in hatred, his face burning. When he first found out that his 3rd brother, Nan Tianyong, had been thrown out of the Hong Merchant Guild, he had been full of disdain and disdain. He didn't expect that when he was the one being thrown out and had made ample preparations beforehand, he still couldn't escape from the same embarrassing situation. How could he endure this? As the eldest senior brother who was in charge of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he was thrown out of the street from the 2nd floor without being able to resist, and was ridiculed by so many passers-by. Today, the southern sky gate had completely embarrassed him for the rest of his life. As for Yu Zhe, a nobody like him, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. This senior uncle of his was so amazing. He had pressured Hong Zhong and the others to the point where they couldn't even breathe. But he still ended up in such an embarrassing situation. Not only did he fail to find out more about Lin Air's background, but he had also embarrassed himself. This was really a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. The 3 heroes of the Nan family were so famous, but in the end, when they went up against a giant like the Hong Merchant Guild, it was their 3rd brother and 2nd brother who were thrown out of the street to be humiliated and ridiculed. Yu Zhe finally understood that they were never on the same level. Chapter 3849. Both of them were smart people. No matter how much they couldn't swallow their anger today, they could only grit their teeth and swallow it. Otherwise, with their strength, if they really fought with so many experts from the Hong Chamber of Commerce, the outcome wouldn't be as simple as losing face. Just as Southern Heavenly Gate and Yu Zhe were planning to escape, a piece of paper floated in front of them. It was the letter that Southern Heavenly Gate had previously shown to intimidate Hong Zhong. The letter was signed by Hong Ing Group's 4 Directions supervising envoy. You want to threaten this old man with just a piece of lousy paper? Do the 2 of you think my Hong Chamber of Commerce is too simple and dirty? You should take this kind of trash back and read it slowly. Hong Zhong stood by the window on the 2nd floor and smiled faintly. Take care, I won't see you out. The crowd of passers-by cheered loudly. Hong Zhong had been operating in the inner street of the market for several decades, and he had always been kind to everyone. He had a good reputation, and his relationships with people were extraordinary. It was not something that a so-called important figure like the Southern Heavenly Gate could compare to. You've got guts. Old man, remember this. I'll settle this score with you sooner or later. I want to see how long you can be a shopkeeper of a branch." Southern Sky Gate gritted his teeth and cursed. Then, amidst the laughter of the crowd, he and Yuja covered their faces and fled in a sorry state. Looking at the backs of the two fleeing figures, Hong Zhong smiled faintly and muttered to himself, "How long can I be a shopkeeper? Of course, I can be a shopkeeper for as long as I want. Old Hong, you've lost so much face this time. That guy definitely won't let this go. You have to be prepared." One of the guest experts reminded him, if everything went according to plan, the South Heaven Gate would surely contact the supervising envoys of the Four Directions after they returned. Hong Zhong's actions would surely incur their displeasure, which would bring him some trouble. Hong Zhong shook his head indifferently. "It doesn't matter. There's no need to worry too much about a clown. If they want to scare me with a mere letter, the Nan family's 3 heroes are too naive." Hong In Group supervising inspector? When the guest experts heard this, they looked at each other and laughed. Their faces were full of mockery. There was nothing wrong with the Southern Sky Gate's logic in using Hong Ying's 4 Directions supervising envoys to threaten a branch manager. Normally speaking, no branch manager of the Hong Chamber of Commerce would dare to ignore such a threat. If it was anyone else, the Southern Heavenly Gate would have completed their mission perfectly. However, the Southern Sky Gate had made a fatal mistake. Hong Zhong's position in the Hong Merchant Association was never as simple as a shopkeeper of a branch. He had another, more important identity. His surname was Hong. If Hong Zhong did not mention this identity, the 4 foreign chamberlains would have almost forgotten about it. Now that he thought about it, he understood what Hong Zhong had done just now. However, just because they can't touch me doesn't mean they'll give up. I'm a little worried about that little brother Lin Air now. There was a hint of worry between Hong Zhong's brows. After the previous few encounters, he had already seen the incredible potential in Lin Yi. This potential was something that he had never seen before. As a businessman, Hong Zhong's intuition told him that this Lin Yi was the rare commodity he had been waiting for. If he missed this opportunity, he might not have another one like this in his life. Hong Zhong was very clear that no matter how the Southern Sky Gate tried to provoke the 4 Directions supervising envoys, they would never be able to threaten him. However, Lin Yi was different. But that Lin Air was different. Even if he could defeat Yuja, and even if he could use that unknown but shocking killing move to instantly kill Nan Tianyong, a peak late-stage Shuji expert, in the end his potential was far from being developed. His strength was still very weak. If the South Heaven Gate took the opportunity to blow the matter up, forcing the authorities of the Soaring Sky Pavilion to pressure the enforcement hall to dig Lin Air out, it would be hard to tell what would happen to him. After all, with his current strength, there was no way he could withstand the storm. In this situation, even if Hong Zhong wanted to help Lin Yi, there was nothing he could do. Just like the Southern Sky Gate and Yuja, he knew nothing about Lin Yi's background. On the other hand, after suffering such a huge loss at the Hong Merchant Guild, the Southern Sky Gate would not let it go so easily. The first thing he did when he returned to the Soaring Pavilion was to write a letter to the 4 Directions supervising inspector of the Hong In Group in the Middle Island. There was no need to exaggerate. As long as he truthfully described what happened at the Hong Merchant Guild today, he would not need to intervene. The more powerful a person was, the more they valued their reputation. If Hong Zhong did not take his letter seriously, it was the same as not taking him seriously. Even if the Southern Sky Gate did not try to sow discord, the 4 Directions supervising inspector of the Middle Island would definitely attack Hong Zhong for the sake of his reputation. The second thing was to make a big deal out of the death of the 3rd brother, Nan Tianyong. Since Hong Zhong was unwilling to cooperate, then if he wanted to force Lin Air, the individual cultivator of unknown origin, out, he had to borrow the power of the law enforcement hall. However, the enforcement hall was one of the top departments among the 3 great pavilions of the North Island. Its power was not to be underestimated, not to mention the Southern Sky Gate's eldest senior brother in charge of the soaring pavilion. Even the elders with weaker power would not be able to influence it. In the entire soaring pavilion, the number of people that could force the hall master of the enforcement hall, Ramjia, to lower his head could be counted on one hand. The person that the Southern Sky Gate was looking for this time was the most powerful one among them, the master of the soaring pavilion, Shanghai Tianhua. The Southern Sky Gate had carefully considered the reason why he was looking for Shanghai Tianhua. Shanghai Tianhua was the undisputed leader of the soaring pavilion. Now that his third brother, the supervising deacon of the soaring pavilion, had been killed, it was normal for him, the second brother, to seek justice from the first senior brother. No one else would be able to find fault with him. Shanghai Tianhua, the first senior brother in charge of the soaring pavilion, was definitely a super expert that stood at the top of the pyramid of the North Island. Even though the Southern Sky Gate was the eldest senior brother in charge of the soaring pavilion, it was not easy for him to meet with him. Fortunately, the Southern Sky Gate was not the eldest senior brother in charge of the soaring pavilion for nothing. Due to his position, he would often interact with the higher-ups. Although he did not speak much with them, as time went by, he was able to figure out the whereabouts of these people. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.